What up, IB Nation? It is 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and I'm on a show, so I'm fired up just with that alone. But I'm Vince D'Addario, and those of you that are always here in the afternoon may not recognize me these days. So I'm back doing some afternoon shows. School's almost over, and so I'll be able to jump back in with both feet. That guy over there, that's Brian Driscoll. He's the boss man. He's in charge of everything.
But not sure the relevancy to today's show, but hey,
it's all good. But no, today is Tuesday, and what we are going to start doing, starting today, is going through each position, and we're going to break down each position. Mm-hmm. And I know all of you are going to be shocked. The OGs out there are going to be shocked by the fact that Brian and I have selected quarterback to lead things off. I know.
No way.
I know you're all shocked by that. But no, we're going to talk quarterbacks today. We're going to break down what the quarterback position looks like on the roster, the depth chart, all that fun stuff.
Well, Vince, it would make sense for us to do this if we weren't both like offensive minded guys. I mean, we always do offense first, right? I mean, that's just, there's got to be some order, and that's just the way that we do it. But it also adds to the fact that, I mean, this is a big storyline for Notre Dame in 2023. You know, the quarterback position is going to be a very important part of, you know, whether or not this football team is or isn't good enough to go out there and compete for a championship this season. It is a position that we're going to, you know, dive into and discuss that has been a problem for Notre Dame for years. I mean, I wrote an article the other day talking about, you know, so we're going to do these shows on Tuesdays. We're going to do these breakdowns on Tuesdays. We're really mixing things up this summer. We'll finally have our full new summer platform launched the next couple of weeks. Vince actually took the day off today to do this show. Just, you know, just so people understand that. I'm
personal day.
I'm kidding. Had some stuff to get done, and then that freed him up to do the show today. I'm just kind of giving people a hard time on that one. But the Tuesday show, so Vince is going to start next week once summer's over. He's going to be on, you know, a couple days a week with us. Friday Mailbag will always be Vince starting next week, so that's going to be fun. But the Tuesday show is going to be our sort of our season preview, our position previews as we dive in. So it's going to kind of take us right up to the start of fall camp. The Tuesday show is going to be that. Thursday show is going to be a little bit different. Wednesday show is going to be me doing sort of a solo show. That's going to be sort of that midweek rundown. So a lot of good stuff going on, Vince. But as you dive into this, now that the summer's here, the graduation happened for Notre Dame. You know, the players are reporting this weekend. It really starts to ramp up sort of, okay, the 2023 season is getting here in a hurry. And so we're going to dive into each position group and what the expectations are and diving into the depth chart. And so it's going to be a little bit different from the article I wrote the other day, which is sort of a state of the program. This is more looking at the 23 season. But in that article, the thing that I wrote about is there have been teams at Notre Dame that have been good enough to compete for a championship in a lot of other areas except quarterback.
Yes.
And that's why Marcus Freeman and Tommy Rees went out and got Sam Hartman, and that's the expectation for Sam Hartman. We'll find out if that's going to happen or not. That's why you went out and recruited C.J. Carr, et cetera, et cetera. But that's not for down the road. That's for down the road. This 23 season is big. It's big for Notre Dame. It's big for Marcus Freeman. It's big for the direction of the program. It's big for a lot of reasons. And the quarterback position is going to be a very, very integral part of this season being a big success or Notre Dame just being more of the same. Good, but not good enough. Yeah. And, you know, that's why quarterback is where we're kicking things off with, Vince.
Well, and how many times, I mean, you and I have known each other for a really long time. And how many times have we looked at this roster and
you said that with such disgust. You have known each other for a very long time.
Well, the disgust comes from the fact that you and I have had this exact conversation. It's like, man, they're a quarterback away from being a special program, like a special team specifically for whatever season that we're referring to. They've always been a quarterback away. They've always, you know, we've talked about the elite quarterback recruiting and the development. All of those different things have come into play. And you can blame the recruiting, you can blame the development, you can blame whatever it is you want to do, because I do think there have been some really good quarterbacks. I listened to you and Ryan on the Friday Mailbag on Friday, and you guys were talking about Brandon Wimbush and how his high school film was like, man, this kid is going to be so good, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And then he got to Notre Dame and just never developed and completely changed to who he was, right? And I remember, and I think Ryan said, he was expecting Wimbush to be so good and all these different things. I remember telling somebody, Brandon Wimbush is going to be the next big quarterback at Notre Dame. Like, he is going to surprise a lot of people. He is going to be the guy that's going to take them wherever they need to go. Obviously, that didn't happen. I was a huge Wimbush fan coming out of high school. Not to belabor that point, but the point that I'm making is sometimes it's recruiting, sometimes it's development, but whatever the case may be, they just haven't had elite quarterback play at Notre Dame in a really long time, to be honest with you. And it's exciting. Like, the quarterback position this year is exciting to me. And I'm hoping that it can come to fruition with where we think it's going to go. And that's obviously what we're going to talk about today.
And it's a lot different than where we were a year ago, Vince.
Sure.
I mean, there was excitement a year ago, but it was sort of cautious optimism.
Sure.
Tyler's very talented, but he's got to stay healthy. I mean, how many times did we say that last summer?
Right.
He's this, but he's got to stay healthy. And he couldn't. He couldn't make it through the second game of the year and misses all season. We say, hey, Drew Pine can win you a bunch of games, but he's not going to beat the best teams on your schedule. And that proved to be,
there was some ups and downs, but that was true. Yeah. Right.
Right. I mean, you didn't beat Clemson because of Drew Pine, you didn't,
No.
So you get into it and you say, well, now you've got to get to the point where your quarterback position is able to thrive in the big moments, the big games, where when your team is struggling like you are against a Marshall, where you were against a Stanford, where the quarterback can get you out of that funk. Say whatever you want about Ian Book, but like the Stanford game last year looked a lot like the Pitt game in 2018. Now, Pitt was a better team that year, but Notre Dame 2018 was also a lot better than Notre Dame 2022. But you remember how bad Ian Book was for 3 quarters? I mean, he was bad. He was terrible that game. Missing open reads, missing throws, not getting the ball where it needed to go to. The offense couldn't do anything. But when the game was on the line, Notre Dame is down 14. 14 was a 14-12, I think, 14-13 or something like that going in the fourth quarter. Ian Book goes out and leads them on a big-time drive, lets them go out, throws the big touchdown pass late in the fourth quarter to Miles Boykin and leads them to a victory. I think of the 2019 season when he was awful against Virginia Tech.
That's what I was going to bring up.
2 red zone touchdowns. Wow. Interceptions, and just awful. But when the game was on the line, he was able to lead you down the field and get you to a win. And last year, they didn't really have that. Mm-hmm. So they need a guy that can do that. But then they also need a guy that can do what Ian Book couldn't do, which is when you're playing the best teams in the country, can you put the team on your shoulders and say, we got this? Mm-hmm. We don't know that Sam Hartman's going to be able to do that, but the talent is there. The expectation is there. And that's why there's excitement about this quarterback position of if Sam Hartman can stay healthy, you feel like you're going into a season where, with the exception of one game, you're going to have the best quarterback on the field. If you get in the college football playoff against Georgia, against Alabama, against an Ohio State, against Oklahoma, against a lot of teams, there's a good chance you are going to have the best quarterback on the field. It's been a long time since Ernie's been able to say that.
When was the last time we were able to say that? It's been a long time, man.
Yeah. I would say 2009, but that team wasn't very good. That wasn't a very good team. And so that's where the excitement comes from, is that. Now, is it going to play out that way? That's what we're going to find out. Yeah. But the expectation is certainly there. But then also, is the depth chart good enough to get you through a 12-game season? That's also part of this conversation, Vince, that we're going to dive into as well. And that's just what makes this a very interesting season. 15, Malik Zaire goes down. You had Deshaun Kaiser to turn to.
Right.
I don't know that there's a Deshaun Kaiser on this year's roster. Mm-hmm. And that's
at least not yet. Right. Not yet. And I think that's, quarterback for this team specifically. I think there's obviously a lot of youth, a lot of inexperience on this offensive side of the ball, right? And, whether you're talking about the guards on the offensive line, whether you're talking about the depth of the wide receiver position, the tight end position, who's going to bring them along, right? Who's going to, that's why quarterback is so important in this particular year of offense at Notre Dame. And then you throw into the fact that you also have a new offensive coordinator and you have a new quarterback coach, right? And so all of those things combined, this year it's almost crucial for the success of this team to have stability at the quarterback position. And we think going into the season that that's what we have at Notre Dame. We think that's what we have.
There's two aspects of this, Vince, and this is what makes it an interesting conversation. Aspect number one is the presence of Sam Hartman. Aspect number two is I'm very intrigued to see what kind of impact you're going to have from having a quarterbacks only coach on the roster. Mm-hmm. I'm not someone who believes that you have to have a quarterbacks coach only. I'm someone who believes you can have a good quarterbacks coach and offensive coordinator as the same person if it's the right person. As a matter of fact, it's what I would have always preferred because I was a quarterbacks coach. You know, when I was a pass game coordinator, I was a receivers coach. But when I, you know, as a quarterbacks coach, if I would have stayed in coaching, kept moving up the ranks, that's ultimately what I would have done. That's where I would have been. And I think you can do it. I mean, Lincoln Riley does it.
Sure.
Steve Spurrier did it for a long time as the head coach. Lincoln Riley does it as the head coach. He did it as the OC. But I also think there's some value to where you have a guy that specifically can be that guy. And if Sam Hartman was in year 6 of being at Notre Dame, I'd say I'm fine with the QB coach and the coordinator being the same guy. But with him being in year 1, there's still new stuff for him to learn. Sure. And then having those younger players, there's certain things that you're going to work on teaching Sam Hartman that he needs to learn, adjusting to the offense. But because he's a 6-year senior, there's also a lot of things that you're going to spend your time focusing on the two younger guys. And having Gino Guidugli as the quarterback's coach where, okay, once Sam kind of gets going, it's like, okay, you know, you coach him up and do all that, but a lot of your time needs to be on making sure that you're getting these other two young guys ready. I think that's something that's going to be huge for this year, Vince, as we dive into the depth chart here in a few minutes, because if you have an OC/quarterbacks coach, he has to really be involved once the season starts in the game planning, all the different aspects of being the OC. And a lot of times you're going to have like the GA working with the quarterbacks, the younger quarterbacks. That's what was the dynamic in Notre Dame in recent years, which is, I mean, it's not a criticism. It's just a reality. That's
is what it is. Yeah.
That's the way that it is. Well, now you're going to have a full-time quarterbacks coach who's also been a coordinator focusing on the two young quarterbacks. Mm-hmm. We're going to see what kind of benefit that has, but I think this is the perfect year to have that dynamic. Whereas in most of the time, I'm like, I'm good either way. It's like, is the guy good enough to do it? This is one of those unique years where I think it's going to be beneficial that Notre Dame has someone whose primary responsibility is developing the quarterbacks because of the uniqueness of the depth chart, which I imagine we're going to dive into here next as part of this conversation.
No, absolutely. And I agree with you. This particular, this year in a tunnel, like in a box
vacuum.
Thank you. It is incredibly important to have somebody that can work with these younger guys, because when you're coaching a guy who's been around the block, it's new. Like you said, it's nuances, it's little things. It's, hey, when you see this, or, you know, when you're looking at this, what do you see? Hey, maybe you should look at this. And then boom, they got it. He's got a ton of experience under his belt. It's almost like you have a shorthand in what you're saying with a guy like that when you're a coach. And even though these guys haven't been together, even though Coach Guidugli has not been with Sam Hartman in the past, they're still going to have a shorthand when they're speaking to one another because they've just been doing it for so long. That's not going to be the case with the rest of the roster. And now that you lost, Tyler to Alabama, to the transfer portal, it's even more critical that the time is spent with the guys that are left on the depth chart to get them ready in case something does happen, because you always have to prepare that you're one snap away. I know that's cliche, but it's a fact. And right now, those guys aren't ready to take over this team. They're not ready. And the more one-on-one time that Coach Guidugli can spend with these guys, the better off they're going to be, and the better off this team as a whole is going to be. So you're right. This year in a vacuum, I think it's incredibly important that the quarterback's coach is just a quarterback's coach. Focus on those young guys and tweak Sam Hartman as he goes along. That's going to be the important part.
When you look at the depth chart of this football team at quarterback, Vince, it really comes down to a couple different ways of looking at it. Number one is just from a pure number standpoint. I think 4 is always my ideal number at
Sure.
quarterback. The exceptions being if my number 2 is a guy that has some experience in the system, 3-4 years in the system, a guy that hey, look, we know we can go to this guy. If Drew Pine would have returned, let's just say Drew Pine would have returned for 2023 and Steve Angeli transferred. I'm just for argument's sake. I'd feel a lot better about a 3-man depth chart because, hey, we know who Drew is. We know that Drew can go in there and get you out of a game and lead you to victory over certain teams, and he knows how to make the right checks, and he'll have really gained a lot of experience last year. He'll be better. Drew Pine's going to be better in 23 than he was in 22 because of just the experience aspect alone. And so you say, okay, yeah, they're only 3, but if something happens to the starter, you know what you're going to get at quarterback, and you can game plan accordingly. Hey, we know who Drew is. We know his strengths. We know his weaknesses. Right. We know what he can do. Now it's like you don't know what Steve Angeli can do. You don't know what Kenny Minchy can do. I know what they can do in practice. Mm-hmm. I know what they can do in 7-on-7. I know what they can do in team periods in practice. I know what they can do in one-on-ones, but I don't know what they can do in front of 70 to 80, 90,000 people. I have no clue what they're going to do. I have no clue when the speed of the game gets faster and they've got to make all those checks and different things like that. I have no idea. And I think those are some of the things you focus on, Vince, and say, this is the question mark that you have is it's the numbers is a concern. What doubly is concerning when you just look at it from a depth chart standpoint, Vince, is that the depth behind Sam Hartman is so inexperienced. You have a true freshman in Kenny Minchy who missed a chunk of his senior season. And you have a guy in Steve Angeli who was a 2-year starter in high school. And one of those years was a COVID year where he only played like 6 games. Mm-hmm. This guy has not played a lot of football. This is a kid that didn't even pass for 3,000 yards in his entire high school career. Didn't throw a single pass last year. Whatever you think of Steve Angeli as a player, some people like him more than me. Some people like him less than me. That's not really the point of this conversation yet. Right. It's this kid has not played a lot of football, not just in college, but in high school. He has not played a lot of football. He threw for, I think, most yards he threw for, Vince, in excuse me, in high school was, I think, like 1,800 yards, I think is what he threw for. And so this isn't a guy that you can look at and say, hey, like when Everett Golson stepped in 2012, he didn't have a lot of experience in Notre Dame. He didn't play a single snap the year before because this is before the 4-game the 4-game rule where you can still play 4 games in redshirt. But Everett Golson was a guy that had like 12,000 high school, passing yards in high school, had thrown for 120 touchdowns in high school, and had led Myrtle Beach to a state championship. I mean, this was a guy that played a lot of football in his career. Steve Angeli's a kid that, as I said, I think as a senior threw for like 1,780 yards. I'm actually trying to see if I can look up the total numbers now. So that's also concerning when you look at the experience aspect of it. Is it's not always just numbers. It's also a lot of times can be numbers plus the fact that you're looking for a guy, you're looking at a guy who just hasn't played a ton of football in his career at any level. And that adds to sort of my angst for, boy, if Sam Hartman goes down, I don't know that they're going to be able to get what they got out of the backup quarterback last year. It may be better. I mean, because I think Steve Angeli has better physical tools than Drew Pine, but it's the lack of experience in the unknown that makes it concerning. And Kenny Minchy, I know, has the physical tools, and he's a really smart kid. I mean, that's what he was known for, Vince. But it's more
true
so
freshman. I mean,
it's true freshman. So I mean, I don't want to get too much into the specific of the players, but I'm we'll break down their strengths and the fits and all that. But again, it's a kid that missed about half of a senior year of high school. So that lack of playing experience is something that really concerns me when I look at the backup quarterback position. I'm not concerned about the talent as much. As if I could fast forward and make these 2 kids both a year older.
Oh, for sure.
I'm not worried about quarterback position at all.
Let me ask you a question, Brian. With the way things are going these days with the transfer portal and all that. And I agree with you. In my mind, 4 quarterbacks is absolutely the ideal, and essentially 1 from every class, right? I mean,
on average,
1-year guy, 2-year guy, 3-year guy, 4, whatever, right? Is it realistic this day and age to have 4 quarterbacks on your roster? Do you think guys are going to be patient enough? You know what I mean?
It's a lot harder, Vince, but I think that's where you you can do some things where you say, hey, look, we've got to sign 2 quarterbacks in this high school class, knowing that one kid is a lifer. It's a kid that wants to be here.
Yeah.
Going out in the transfer portal and getting a kid who understands he's going to come here and be a depth guy. Those are the things you've got to look for. It's going to be a lot harder. It's going to be a lot harder.
Yeah.
I mean, we saw it this past offseason. The addition of Sam Hartman didn't mean that 1 quarterback left, 2 left. And now Sam Hartman wasn't the direct reason why Drew Pine left, because they didn't have Sam Hartman yet. But it was the notion that, hey, we're going to go to the portal to get a quarterback, which eventually led to the Sam Hartman, is the reason Drew Pine left. And then it's the reason that Tyler Buckner left. So it's going to get harder and harder and harder. And that's why you have to be really smart about who you're recruiting in your roster management. And there's going to be a notion, and I've talked about maybe doing this in 24 class. If you can find some kid that's a good, solid quarterback that loves Notre Dame and understands you're not an NFL quarterback, but you're a good player and you're going to come here and get a Notre Dame degree. Maybe find some kid who wants to, be a coach someday and understand, like, hey, man, look, of course you're going to get an opportunity to compete, but you're coming in the same year as CJ Carr. Understand what your role is expected to be. I would scour the nation for a kid like that and try to add him into the 2024 class, because here's the problem you run into. If you don't do that, you're forced right back into the portal again next year, because if Kenny Minchy or CJ Carr passes up Steve Angeli, do we know that Steve Angeli is going to stay?
Sure.
After that, and now you've got what, 2 quarterbacks on next year's roster? Then you got to go to the portal to get a third.
Yeah.
And you're
you
back
might need
into the same problem.
Yeah, you might need 2
so
at that point. Yeah.
That's something I think they need to look into is, every third year or so, getting a second quarterback in a class, but you're recruiting a second quarterback that is looking at his scholarship offer a whole lot different than maybe a CJ Carr, a Kenny Minchy, a Deuce Knight, KJ Lacey, George McIntyre guys are looking at their scholarship offer. Because I do think you need a 4th quarterback. Having said that, Vince, I think you can live with 3 if the makeup of the 3 is the right level of experience. But again, we could be in the same situation next year that we're in this year.
Oh, absolutely.
If Kenny Minchy or let's just say Kenny Minchy, for the argument's sake, let's just say Kenny Minchy beats out Steve Angeli this year during the season, and Angeli leaves. Then they decide, well, Kenny's not ready, CJ's not ready, so they go out and get the next year's version of Sam Hartman. Then we're back to having a veteran transfer quarterback with a true sophomore and a true freshman at quarterback that don't have a lot of experience. And now the difference is the talent level of that duo would be better than the talent level of Angeli and Minchy, because CJ Carr is more talented than Steve Angeli.
Sure.
So it's tough to put that together nowadays. It really is. You've got to find the right kids to bring in. And because, like you said, I mean, you signed a quarterback in the 2019 class, or he transferred. If you think about 4 straight quarterback classes for Notre Dame had their quarterback transfer. And if you go 5 years, that quarterback changed positions. 17, the quarterback was Avery Davis. He transferred positions. 19, the first quarterback, they got Cade McNamara decommitted. They went out and got Brandon Clark. He transferred. That followed 18 when you had Phil Dracovic. He transferred. 2020, Drew Pine. He transfers. 2021, Tyler Buckner. He transfers. So
it's
now,
not a great track record, but
no, it's not.
Individually, you get it. But then if you look at it as a whole like that, is scary.
Part of it is issues that Notre Dame had with those kids. Part of it is kids getting beat out. Brendan Clark transferred because he got beat out. I mean, it's just part of the deal. That's why Drew Pine left. That's why Tyler Buckner left. So it's not saying, Kelly and Reese and so-and-so didn't know. It's just that's why you got to be smart about, hey, we're going to bring in this kid that maybe isn't a highly ranked guy, but this is a kid that wants to be here and understands his role.
Sure.
Because you've got to make the numbers work, in my opinion. Now, maybe that's through the portal. Maybe that's through high school recruiting. However, you need to be able to get a guy like that, and preferably a guy that's going to be there for multiple seasons, ideally. So depth is definitely a problem. Experience is a problem behind the starter, Vince. But I do think there's talent there, and that's always gives you something to work with. I'm not as high on Steve Angeli as some other players, as we'll get ready to break down the different players. But there's some ability there, right? Like, this isn't like Ron Paul's the third. You know what I mean? Like this is a good football player. It's just, is he good enough to lead Notre Dame to a championship? That's a question mark.
That's the question.
I think Kenny Minchy has tons of talent. Is he good enough to lead Notre Dame to a championship? That's still a question mark. So the depth, I think, when we evaluate each of these positions, depth will be a part of what we discuss, because depth in college football today is vitally important to success. We've talked about this with Georgia. Each of the last 2 years, Georgia lost their best edge pass rusher. They lost Adam Anderson to disciplinary things in 2021. He was replaced by Nolan Smith, who stepped in, didn't miss a beat. This year, Nolan Smith, they lose to injury, and they have other guys stepping in, and they don't miss a beat. And not necessarily that somebody replaced Nolan Smith, but other positions around him, were able to pick up the slack, and you were able to put a good football player in the field to replace him. Right. When we look at Alabama in 2021, a big part of the reason Alabama couldn't beat Georgia in the championship game is because there was such a huge drop-off once Jamison Williams got hurt. And we saw this with Ohio State last year. Marvin Harrison goes down, and none of the other receivers could step up and make those plays. Depth has had a big impact on who the champions have been the last 2 years. Some teams have handled losing guys better than others.
Sure.
And that's where Notre Dame's got to get to. And that's why it's important to have this conversation as we go through each of these positions, Vince.
Agreed. Yeah, I will say that I don't want to look at 24 just yet for the quarterback position because it scares me. And so let's just talk about 23, because that's the depth chart that we're going to discuss today. And we'll start. You want to start at the top? You want to start at the bottom?
Let's start at the top.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's start at the top of the depth chart. We're going to talk in, obviously, Sam Hartman, clear starter. There's not going to be a competition in the fall. Sam Hartman is your starter. So let's break down Sam Hartman. You've had a really good series, by the way, over on the message board about Sam Hartman's deep ball. I believe there was three different series, or not three different series, three different parts of a series about Sam Hartman's deep ball. Really, really good stuff for you X's and O's people that you want to dive into over on the message board. And that's the quality of stuff you're getting on the message board. Just FYI. Plug.
We're doing a lot more of that moving forward as well.
Yeah. So Sam Hartman comes into a roster. We're going to talk about him. He comes into a roster that needs a leader at quarterback, not only from a leadership standpoint, but also from an on-the-field standpoint. He's got all the experience in the world. Obviously, he's top 20 all-time in college football for passing yards and touchdowns, I believe. I mean, when you talk experience, you can't get more experience than what Sam Hartman is, period.
No, he's 19th all-time, I believe, in passing yards and 18th all-time in passing touchdowns in college football history.
Right.
All-time ACC leader in passing touchdowns, second all-time in passing yards, I believe, is where he ranks.
So,
But let's be real about something, Vince.
Let's do that.
Leadership has not been a problem for Notre Dame at quarterback for a long time.
Agreed.
There was no leadership issues with Brandon Wimbush in 17. 16 is the last time that was a big-time leadership problem, because the guy that was your best leader at quarterback was sitting on the bench for you.
Right.
That was the problem. Then 17, Brandon Wimbush had no leadership issues. He was a good leader. The team rallied behind both Brandon and Ian Book in 18. And for all my issues with Ian Book as a player and some of there was never a conversation of kid's not a good leader.
No. Or
the kids liked him, respected him. None of that. None of that. Kids played hard for him. They respected him. He was the leader of that football team. Jack Cohn quickly became that guy in 2021. And you and I, how many times did you talk about how the leadership of Drew Pine? I mean, you talked about it constantly.
Just outward leadership. Just outward. Everybody sees it.
The backup. Right.
Yeah.
So leadership hasn't been an issue for a while. The issue has been, do you have playmakers and do you have big play quarterbacks? The big play part we'll get into in a minute, because that's a bit of a more, okay, we can have a debate here. I think the big thing about that deep ball series, Vince, is the notion that the playmaking at quarterback from a throwing standpoint has simply just not been there. And that's something that, to me, Jack Cohn showed us glimpses of in 2021.
Yeah.
But that's, and there was a couple games where Ian Book showed that, but it wasn't consistent enough. But a guy that can just go out there and say, hey, I'm going to make all the plays I need to make with my mind and my arm. And that's going to make us a really difficult football team to beat. And that's what Notre Dame has been missing We can talk all we want about a lot of other things, but Sam Hartman was brought here not because he's an efficient game manager, because he's a guy that is a good, solid leader. He's a guy that's, got good ball placement. Those things are all true, Vince. I'm not saying that they're not true, but those are not the reasons that you brought Sam Hartman into Notre Dame. They're benefits, they're bonuses, they're nice things to have, but they're not why you brought him in. You brought him in because he was a playmaker at Wake Forest, and some numbers to back that up. In the last 2 years, there were 2 quarterbacks that passed for more touchdowns than Sam Hartman. Their names were number 1 overall draft pick Bryce Young and number 2 overall draft pick CJ Stroud. Over the last 2 years, 0 quarterbacks had more total touchdowns than Sam Hartman, who also had 12 rushing touchdowns the last 2 years, 11 of which came in 2021. So he had 89 touchdowns the last 2 years. Neither Bryce Young nor CJ Stroud had that number. So you're not talking about a game manager. You're talking about a guy that produced at a high level. Correct. 2 years ago, Sam Hartman threw for 4,222 yards, which, by the way, would be a Notre Dame record by about 300 yards. Brady Quinn obviously has the all-time record with anything like 39-19, so it'd be like 303 yards more than what Brady Quinn had. I believe 39-19 is correct, right? Isn't that what Brady passed for?
I remember it was just under 4,000. So that sounds right.
I'm going to, because you know me, Vince, I have to know the specific. I have to know that number is right. Yeah, 39-19 is the all-time record. So he would be 303 yards better than anything Notre Dame ever did. Now, he played in 14 games, so that factors into it as well. Then this past season, he, quote unquote, only throws for 3,701 yards, also throws for 38 touchdowns. But the interesting thing about it is, Vince, he actually passed for more yards this year per game. It's that he played 2 less games because he missed the first game of the season with the health issue, and then they didn't play in the ACC title game like they did in 2021. So you're talking about a guy that's averaged over 308 yards per game the last 2 seasons. You're talking about a guy that has, I believe, over 15 games of over 300 yards passing the last 2 seasons. You're talking about a guy that I think a number that I put in a post last night is like 17 games the last few years of 3 or more touchdowns, something like that. Let me look at that again to make sure I have that number correct. So he had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of his 12 games this year. He had 3 or more touchdowns, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 times last year. So 17. I was correct. So the last 2 years, he's had 17 of the 26 games he played in. He had 3 or more touchdowns, passes in a game, and that's passes, not just runs, but passes. And so when you look at it, Vince, it adds to, he had 2 games last year where he accounted for 6 touchdowns last season. The season before, he had a game where he had 7 touchdowns against North Carolina and lost. He accounted for 7 touchdowns in the game and they lost. He's had multiple games where he's accounted for 5 or more touchdowns, rushing and passing. This is a guy that produces at a high level.
Yep.
And the last part about it is what you're looking at is a guy, Vince, that produces in areas where Notre Dame has not been very good. And that's primarily throwing the deep ball. And so what I want to do is kind of just give some data to back up what we're talking about here. So last season, when you look at Notre Dame's offense last season, I think we're going to kind of just give you we're going to kind of get a little nerdy here. So just kind of bear with us a little bit, so you can kind of understand, you'll get where we're coming from here in a second, but it's gonna stand out to you. So when you look at last season, the Notre Dame starting quarterbacks threw 51 passes that went 20 yards or more past the line of scrimmage, and they completed 24 of them. So they were actually just pretty conservative. Yeah, it's actually the percentage was not that bad. The yards per attempt wasn't very good. because obviously a lot of their 20-yarders were like right at the 20-yard mark.
Sure.
They weren't throws that were like really far down the field.
They were all to Michael Mayer on crossers.
Right. I mean, well, not crossers, but like over routes and things like that. They weren't necessarily they weren't throwing bombs.
Right. Correct.
And one of the things that we're going to track this year is we're going to track actually passes of over 30 yards, because I actually think that's, in today's game, that's a little bit more indicative of kind of where you need to be as a quarterback. And then in 2021, Jack Cohn threw 54 passes that traveled at least 20 yards or further down the field. Tyler Buckner threw 5, and Drew Pine threw 4. So you threw 63 passes that traveled at least 20 yards or more down the pass line of scrimmage. In 2020, in 12 games, Ian Book only threw 41 passes that traveled at least 20 yards past line of scrimmage. He went 16 of 19. Notre Dame in 2020, a year they made the playoff, had 560 total passing yards on throws that traveled at least 20 yards past the line of scrimmage. In 2019, he was a lot better. He had 63, which for Notre Dame was a lot, but because he had Chase Claypool and Cole Kmet. So he had 994 yards on throws that went beyond the 20 yards down the field. And so Notre Dame has not had a quarterback that has passed as an offense, has not passed for over 1,000 yards on throws 20 yards or more. Okay. Those are the numbers that you're looking at. So I'm going to give you some counter numbers to kind of show what we're talking about here. And I'm actually going to pull these up. So I'm going to share with you, when you talk about just a guy that is a playmaker, I'm going to show you guys this. So this is an example of what you saw on the message board breakdown, Vince, that you're referring to.
Yep.
So in the last 2 years, so last season, and you look at the number of Power 5 quarterbacks, that the number of attempts on throws of at least 20 yards past line of scrimmage. Sam Hartman led the nation with 93 attempts of at least 20 yards past line of scrimmage. He had 41 completions. It's an okay percentage. It's not a great percentage. It's okay. Only Drake May had more completions past 20 yards. That was by 2. The next closest guy had 4. Caleb Williams had 5 fewer than Sam Hartman, and he played 2 more games. That's the other thing to consider. Drake May had 43, but he played 2 more games than Sam Hartman played last year. Keep that in mind as well. So, and this shows here, that's right here, shows the number of games. So like Michael Penix, who was 4 behind him in attempts, played 1 more game. Caleb Williams was 7 below him. Drake May was 8 below him. They played 2 more games than Sam Hartman played last year. And so when you look at those numbers, Vince, you see a guy that throws the ball down the field a ton.
Mm-hmm.
Part of that is a aspect of the offense, right? I mean, they throw the ball down the field a lot. But the other part of it is you have a quarterback that's willing to do it. I mean, you and I have sat here next to each other
so many times,
frustrated as heck because a play was called that he wouldn't throw the ball down the field. I mentioned that Notre Dame hasn't had a quarterback that has passed for over, or no, as an offense hasn't passed for over 1,000 yards on deep balls going back all the way to 2017. I'm actually curious what the Notre Dame numbers were in 2018, but I don't think they were as great as they were in 2019, where they actually threw the ball down the field a little bit more. But you look at Sam Hartman the last 2 years, Vince, you want to have some fun with this one. Sam Hartman last year passed for 1,304 yards on throws that traveled at least 20 yards past the line of scrimmage. Now, 2021, when he played 2 more games, when he played 16 games or 14 games, had 1,613 yards on throws past that went longer than 20 yards past the line of scrimmage. I'm actually looking up these numbers. So Book had 602, and Wimbush had 602. Wimbush had 231, and then Jurkovec had he didn't have any that year. I thought Jurkovec had a deep ball throw in 2018. That was 2019. 2019 is when Jacob. I'm thinking the New Mexico game in 2019.
Oh, yep.
So 2019, Notre Dame went over 1,000 yards on deep balls as a team. Ian Book threw for 994 and Phil Dracovic threw for 84. So they barely went over in 2019 against a schedule where they beat one ranked opponent. Sam Hartman's quote unquote down year was 1,304 last season because he only played in 12 games. And so when you want to talk about a guy that had big time, here's another one, Vince. Sam Hartman in 2020 threw for 905 yards on deep balls that traveled at least 10, 20 yards down the line of scrimmage. He only played, I think, 9 games that year because they had a bunch of games canceled because of COVID.
Yeah.
He only played 9 games. And so he threw for 2,200 yards that year, and 900 of those yards, over a third, were on deep balls. So we're talking about a huge disparity here in production, Vince, a huge disparity in production. You're talking about a guy that last season on throws of at least 20 yards threw 16 touchdown passes. 30 of Sam Hartman's touchdowns last season, Vince, were on throws that traveled over 10 yards past the line of scrimmage. So you're talking about a guy that's throwing the ball down the field a lot.
Yes.
And he's effective at it. And that's the key.
And so what can you take from that? Number one, he's not afraid to push the ball down the field, obviously, right? Because he's going to do it. And that was always our biggest complaint, was that it wasn't a lack of talent. It was just a lack of not pulling the trigger and doing it, because we've seen the arm strength of past quarterbacks being able to do it, and they just didn't, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's number one. He's got the willingness to do it. Awesome. The other thing I think that doesn't get talked about a whole lot when it comes to Sam Hartman and this year at Notre Dame is he's coming into this season and into this experience at Notre Dame with a very sizable chip right here on his shoulder, because he, got no love from the NFL draft. Obviously, that's because if he did, he wouldn't be at Notre Dame. I mean, let's be honest, right? He had the stats to show, what he can do and all of these different things, but he was in a gimmicky offense, all of those different things. So he's betting on himself. I know that's cliche again. He's betting on himself. He's going to a pro style offense. He's going to a big time program, and he's betting that he's going to take this team to someplace it hasn't been in a really, really long time. So I like the fact that he's going to play with a chip on his shoulder, because he's got something to prove to a lot of people. And anybody outside of this chat, who's not a Notre Dame fan, they're looking past Sam Hartman in a lot of ways. I mean, that the article that we talked about where they tiered all the quarterbacks, and he's a 4th tier quarterback with like sub tiers and everything else. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous.
Tyler Buckner's ahead of him.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Correct. The guy that was going to be number 2 behind him is ahead of him on this list. Like,
right.
It just ridiculous takes out there. And Sam Hartman, he hears this stuff, and he's not going to get on social media and clap back at it or anything like that. He's going to internalize it because he's a professional. I mean, he's a 6th year senior. He's been doing this for a long time, but he's going to put it into his play. And I'm sorry, Brian, I just feel like, obviously the numbers are one thing, and I'm excited about the numbers. I'm excited about what that means. But then that other aspect, that other mental aspect of what he's bringing to the table, that gets me even more excited.
And I want to respond to something that's said in the chat. This is how sometimes I laugh at some things that are said. Somebody said Hartman had to throw it down the field all the time because he was playing from behind a lot of Wake Forest. Utter nonsense. Completely not true. Wake Forest won 11 games in 2021.
Right.
They won 8 games last year. They were not playing from behind a lot. That was their offense, and he was good at it.
Sure.
So, I mean, anyone that's actually watched Wake Forest play the last 2 years knows that's just not true. There's just no truth to that comment. There's none. And so, but that's what you get, right? Is you get the people that just make assumptions about, well, of course he had to do that. This is a part of what he did. And anyone that has talked to people around the program from practices, Vince, I've heard a bunch of times you'll hear people talk about like they threw the ball. I've talked to people who have friends who officiated practices that Notre Dame had.
Sure.
And they'll say the same thing. Like they threw the ball down the field a ton in the practices that we saw. And so, this if you want to understand who he was, it's not because they were playing behind. It was because that's who they were. That's who they were as an offense. That's what they did as an offense. And so if the game that so just so you know, if you're not on the board, the data that I showed you was from part 1 of that film breakdown that I had. After that, there's graphs and then video clips of the plays that break it down. So it's not just a written film room. It's actually, we have graphs of the play and break down the play. Like I'll show you a little example. So like, here's a particular play here where he throws a deep ball. This particular play was from 2021. It was a game against Florida State, and that he threw a deep ball, and it was a great throw. There's a lot of that stuff in those breakdowns as well. So if you want to check those out, that's something that I think is a really cool part of that breakdown. I really enjoyed doing that.
That was awesome.
But the thing about it is, Vince, is that was a game that against Florida State. I think I had 3 clips from that game that I used or included at some point in time in that breakdown. In that particular game in 2021, he went 2 of 3 for 93 yards because he had 2 bombs down the field. And that was a game they won 35-14. So when you complete the balls and your team jumps ahead, you're actually you can say, well, they would have thrown the ball more down the field because those were both in the first half. And they jumped all over Florida State, and he didn't throw the ball down the field a whole lot in the second half. So if you're going to say there were some games that he had to throw the ball down the field more because they were winning, there were some other games where they had big wins where he didn't throw the ball down the field a ton. And that takes it, that says, okay, well, they would have done that. So, I mean, you could spin this all you want. The fact of the matter is anyone that actually watches them play knows that this is just who he is. This is just what he does. He threw, for example, 8 deep balls last year against Boston College in that game, a game that Wake Forest won. I think it was like 45 to, let me see what the final score was of that game last year against Boston College. 43-15. He threw 5 touchdown passes. Did he do that did he throw 8 deep balls because they were behind? Or is that just who he is in the offense they run? That's who he is. That's the offense they run. That's why Notre Dame went out and got him. So this notion that he did that because they were down a lot, there's no factual basis to that. None. So that's what people need to understand and just say, hey, I'm going to throw out some random opinion because this is how I feel when it's not actually at all backed up in data whatsoever.
Right.
Because did you notice all the guys that were on that list of deep ball throwers, they were all from good teams? USC, North Carolina, Washington. Those are some good football teams. They were not from TCU. They were not from teams that were losing, so they had to throw it deep a ton. Here's the other thing. If you're way behind, what's the other team doing? They're playing the deep ball. They're not going to give you deep balls.
Exactly.
So it doesn't even make sense from that standpoint either. This is who he is, and this is why Notre Dame went out and got him.
Correct.
One of the things so we'll move on from that. Here's another data point that I found really fascinating, Vince, that I think needs to be taken into consideration too is one of the complaints I've heard about Sam Hartman from people that just look at stats. This is why you don't just look at stats. I mean, stats are fine. You can look at
They're
stats.
Good. Yeah, sure.
They give you something, but you've got to really know how to study stats and look at things. And one of the things I've heard about Sam Hartman is, I wish he completed passes at a higher level. Okay, fair. I understand where you're coming from. But when you really dive into their offense and you dive into his numbers, you realize actually this guy does complete passes at a very high level. It's just because he throws the ball down the field so much, it is impactful. So, for example, when you look at C.J. Stroud last season for Ohio State, C.J. Stroud had a pretty significantly higher completion percentage than Sam Hartman did. Not enormously. He wasn't like a 70% guy, but C.J. Stroud completed 66% of his passes. Sam Hartman, I believe, was at 62. Let me just check that real quick and make sure that I'm accurate. 63. So 3-point difference. But when you look at Sam Hartman's numbers, you realize that 3% gap is due to the deep ball because he throws so many more deep balls.
Right.
Sam Hartman threw 93 deep balls last year. CJ Stroud threw 61. On throws of 10 of throws from 10 to 19 yards, CJ Stroud completed 56% of his passes. On throws between 10 to 19 yards, Sam Hartman completed 59.8% of his passes. This is all according to Pro Football Focus. On passes of 0 to 9 yards, CJ Stroud completed 77.7% of his passes. Sam Hartman completed 77.3% of his passes. On throws at or behind the line of scrimmage, or actually behind the line of scrimmage, CJ Stroud completed 92% of his passes. Sam Hartman completed 93.8% of his passes. So this is a guy that is a very accurate passer when you look at his numbers and compare him to other top quarterbacks. And I think that's something that's going to factor in too, because another part of this, Vince, of this equation is, yes, the deep ball is great, but you're not only bringing him in here to throw the deep ball.
Right.
You're also bringing him in here to be really effective on throws down the field. A guy that was better than him last year was Bryce Young, who was at 65.7% on throws that were between 10 and 19. As I said before, Sam Hartman was 59.4. Sam Hartman also had, think about that. Sam Hartman also had 4 more drops than Bryce Young did, but Bryce Young was at 75.8 and 93.0 on 0 to 9 and behind the line of scrimmage, where Sam Hartman was at 77.3 and 93.8. So the point that I'm making here, Vince, is the importance here of this conversation is there's also a level of efficiency here that he brings to the table that is needed. Whereas, when you look at, compare it to Notre Dame, for example, 59.8% completion on throws of 10 to 19. Drew Pine last year was at 51.1, had 4 touchdowns and 5 picks last year on throws of 10 to 19. Sam Hartman was 59.8 and had 14 touchdowns and 4 interceptions on throws that were between 10 to 19, pass line scrimmage. And then Tyler Buckner was at 38.5% on throws between 10 and 19. So as a team, Notre Dame was in the 40% mark on throws between 10 and 19 yards last season. Last year, Tyler Buckner completed 61.1% of his throws between 0 and 9. And Drew Pine, I think, was like low 70s. Let me just find this stat real quick. Drew Pine was at 72.6. So they were in the 60% mark on throws between 0 and 9. Sam Hartman was at 77% last year.
Big difference.
So these get into the efficiency numbers, right? So, yes, big plays are important. You need big plays, but you're not beating Alabama and Georgia because you throw 15 balls 20 yards past line of scrimmage, right? Yep. And so when you look at it and you break it down, you see that this isn't just about throwing a million deep balls. There's a significant difference in efficiency on throws that are under 20 yards as well. That is a significant improvement for Notre Dame. And I think that's another factor that has to be looked at when you're breaking this down as well. One thing that we loved Jack Cohn for at Notre Dame was Jack was really efficient under 20 yards. Him and Sam Hartman have almost identical numbers on 10 to 19 yard completions and under 10 yard completions. And so when you look at that, as he's bringing a similar level of efficiency that Jack brought to the table, but significantly better deep ball. Jack went 17 of 54 on deep balls, 31.5% in 2021. Sam completed almost as many. I mean, Sam was close. His completion number was closer to Jack's attempts number than the two completion numbers were similar to each other. And so those are aspects of it too that you look at, Vince, and say, it's not just the deep ball, it's the efficiency. And that's where the deep balls a lot of times will come from, because you have to guard against some of the other things, and then you're able to throw the ball down the field. Those are all aspects that Sam Hartman brings to the table that make him very entertaining to watch, but also are things that Notre Dame desperately needed in their offense. And that's a big part of it.
There's a couple different things I want to point out here. Number one, When was the last time a defense had to plan for what the quarterback was able to do? Right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I can't even count how many times you and I have had the discussion about, teams are just going to load the box. They're going to say, "Hey, I dare you to throw it over the top," whatever. Not going to happen. And that's how Notre Dame loses big games. I mean, it's like the same storyline over and over and over again. Defensive coordinators are actually going to have to plan against Sam Hartman and what he's able to do, because he can hit all three levels of the defense. And then you add into the fact that Notre Dame's still going to be pretty darn good running the football. Like that's not going away. And I realize we're talking about the quarterbacks right now, but part of what makes a quarterback very good at his job is the defense not really knowing what to pick to stop, right? And so if a team is going to try to stuff the box to stop the run, Sam Hartman's going to have a day. Now, if they put everybody back, not only is the running game going to have a day, but then Sam Hartman's going to be able to pick you apart as well underneath, because he's that accurate at all three levels. So it adds a level of complexity to an offense that hasn't had that level of complexity in a long time. And that is why not only are they going to be able to go deep and score points. Yes, I get that. That's exciting. There's no way to not be excited about that, right? But he's also going to be able to sustain drives, okay? And one of my biggest knocks personally about Notre Dame is, what last year, how many times did the defense give up that long drive at the end of the game, right? They were gassed, they were winded, whatever excuse you want to make, they would give up that long drive. One way to combat that, obviously, is in the weight room and hitting your assignments defensively, et cetera, et cetera. Yes, agree with all of that. But another way to combat that is long, sustained offensive drives that gives your defense a chance to sit. That's just a fact. And I think that they're going to have that aspect to this offense as well. Sam Hartman is going to be able to sustain drives, put together, double-digit play drives. They're going to end in points. And then the defense is going to be able to come back out, do their thing, and then give the ball back to the offense, who is then going to be able to sustain a drive. And just when you think that the drive is not sustainable, he'll go over the top and it'll be a 2-play drive.
Sure. I mean, or they'll go over the top to soften you up, and then that opens up other things too there.
Yes.
And to your point, Vince, is you anticipate having a pass game this year that is going to give you more freedom to protect the run game.
Mm-hmm.
Because last year, if the run game couldn't get going, the offense had trouble.
Right.
I mean, that's just something that we saw a lot last season. And when you start looking at how the offense played last season, like as a team, one of the things that I've pointed to show that how much better Notre Dame was in the second half of the season was how many more points they scored than they did in the first half of the season. So if you look at like where Notre Dame was, to start the season, and just how much their offense struggled, and and just kind of what led to their 3-3 record, and it starts to make sense. You're like, okay, yeah, this team couldn't really score, and they had the one nice game against who was it, North Carolina, right? But this is a team, Vince, that averaged 23.7 points per game through the first 6 games of the season.
Yeah.
And then you say, okay, well, they went 6-1 to end the season, and their lowest point total of that stretch was 27. Their lowest point total of that stretch was 27 points, and they averaged 38.7 points per game. That's great. If they average 38.7 points per game this season, they're going to be hard to beat. But
agreed,
when you look at it, you have to have some context. Against Syracuse, they scored 41 points. They had a pick 6, and they blocked the punt that they recovered at the 2-yard line.
Mm-hmm.
Against Clemson, they had 35 points, but they returned an interception for a touchdown and had a blocked punt for a touchdown and had another interception. They gave them the ball at the 12-yard line. They ripped up Navy, ripped up Boston College pretty good. USC, they moved the ball pretty good on, but, couldn't score. And then, South Carolina, they went out and moved the ball pretty well. But, they weren't necessarily a 38.7 point per game offense.
Right.
And so that's kind of where you look at it and say, hey, this is one of those things where if you can bring some of the big playability, and I wrote an article about this a couple months ago about how Notre Dame's offense just lacked explosives last year. I mean,
Absolutely.
because you can't be they go hand in hand. You can't be a big play offense. I mean, you can't be an efficient offense to the level that Georgia and the teams that are winning are, because they're like 7.5, 7 to 7.5, sometimes close to 8 yards per play, and Notre Dame's like around 6. You need the big play offense. You need the big plays to be that high.
Sure.
But you're also not going to rank that high if you don't have a level of efficiency.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a perfect example for Notre Dame is the difference between the 2015 and the 2017 offense. I mean, the 2015 offense was a big play offense, Vince. We've talked about that. They averaged 7.0 yards per play. The 2017 offense was also a great big play offense. I think Loose Emoji had this stat. Josh Adams had more gains of 50 yards or more in 2017 than any other Notre Dame running back had in their career of 50 yards or more. And yet Notre Dame averaged 6.4 yards per play that season. That's 0.6 fewer. Why? They were far less efficient.
Mm-hmm.
The efficiency, they were boomer bust in a lot of ways, and a lot of it had to do with what? The pass game.
Yeah.
Because the pass game was so inefficient. And I think that's something also that you look at and say, when you break it down, that's a big part of what you expect him to add to the table.
Right. Absolutely. No, absolutely.
Right.
And look, lots of positives about Sam Hartman. No doubt about it. We're all very excited to see what this offense looks like with him behind center.
Yeah. And how does that complement the run game?
Sure.
What impact does it have on the run game?
Right.
That's a big part of it.
I'm actually very interested to see how teams early on, and I realize the front part of the schedule is not super complicated, right? It's not super difficult for Notre Dame, but how are teams going to defend this Notre Dame offense from the jump, right? Before they have some film, before they see, who they are and things like that. Is it going to be the old, hey, we got to stop the run if we want to win? I am very excited to see what happens. Like, for example, the Navy game, right? And I realize who Navy is. I realize who Tennessee State is. Guys, I understand that. Okay. But if a team like those have any chance of beating Notre Dame, that's probably what they're going to have to do. They're going to have to attempt to stop the run, right? Sam Hartman's going to pick them apart, and it's going to be a lot of fireworks, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is, and then when they get to NC State, when they go on the road to NC State, how does NC State match up with this Notre Dame offense? What is their strategy once they have, 3 games of film at that point? What is their strategy? That's going to be the first big test to me. What is their strategy on how to stop this offense? And how does Sam Hartman respond? And how does the offensive coaching staff respond, et cetera? That is going to be really, really fun from an X's and O's standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
So we've talked about a lot of the positives, Brian. Is there anything that you look at when you see Sam Hartman that you think something he needs to work on, something that needs to get better at, and what we're going to be focused on throughout the season?
He needs to not revert back to bad habits that you're trying to rid him of. So we saw a little bit in the spring game where he would do sort of that slow mesh thing. And, there's a time and a place for that. But look, you're not that in that offense anymore, right? Like, make sure you're staying back in the pocket and make sure your footwork is correct. I think one things we saw in the blue gold game, which was super encouraging, Vince, is his footwork in the pocket, throwing the ball down the field, was really crisp. He wasn't, because at Wake, he would get so close to the line of scrimmage. A lot of times he would have to kind of like almost get on his toes a little bit to be able to get the ball off, because he's right there at the line.
Right.
And at times I thought at Notre Dame, in the couple practices we saw, his feet weren't necessarily where they needed to be from a timing standpoint. And then he would rush things and he would throw off his back foot. But when in the spring game, we saw him really clean, driving off that back foot, ripping off, keeping his arm speed consistent. That's all stuff I want to see. And then the other part is there were interceptions there's interceptions he's going to throw you can live with. It's that aggressiveness that comes with what makes him so good. But then there's some throws that's not aggressive. That's just not smart. And he needs to eliminate some of those throws.
Sure.
And another thing is the final thing is, to me, he has to learn that you don't have to put this team on your shoulders week after week. I've pointed this out before. They scored 34, 55, and 52 points in 3 straight games against North Carolina and lost all of them because the defense just couldn't stop anybody. You're not there now. You've got a run game to support you. You've got a great O-line or should have a great O-line. Your defense is good. Like, we're all complaining about how the Notre Dame defense last year, and we're frustrated by it and all this, and they gave up 21 point something points per game defensively. Their season total was like 23. That's because they gave up like 4 pick sixes last year. So the defense actually was like around 21, 22. Sam Hartman would have killed to have a defense that only gave up 22 points per game. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like, this cat led Wake Forest to 8 wins last year with a defense that gave up almost 30 points a game. He gave up 28.3 points per game. He won 11. He and Wake Forest won 11 games in 2021, giving up 28.9 points per game. So you don't have to do that anymore. You've got help. So be aggressive, take your chances. Don't lose that aggressiveness, but you don't have to fit that ball in between 3 dudes when it's just like, take the check down, we'll get in 3rd and 2, and we'll live to fight another day. Or, if it's not there, maybe take a deep shot. So if you're going to be aggressive on 3rd down, be aggressive throwing down the field. If they pick you off 35 yards down the field from midfield, it's a punt.
Yeah.
Don't force a ball at midfield on 3rd and 5 into triple coverage. It bounces up in the air and they pick you off. Know that, hey, if it's not there, try to throw the ball down the field, move around something, because we can punt and pin them deep, and our defense is going to do their thing, and we're going to get the ball back in good position, right? Where at Wake Forest, they couldn't miss possessions. Like, they couldn't afford to have back-to-back punts because then they're going to be down. And so he had to do a lot of those things, Vince. So finding that balance between staying aggressive,
right,
but also knowing the difference between aggressive and just no. And look, there's going to be a couple plays this year where you're like, dude, what the heck were you thinking? He's going to do it. It's just going to happen. It's who he is. And that's who aggressive quarterbacks like him are. Guys that are really confident. They're going to make some throws. You're like, yeah, you thought you could make that throw, but you can't. Not against this team. I can live with that. Sure. Just minimize those. And then the final piece, Vince, is at times when he would turn the ball over early and the other team would go down and score, he would then put like a pressure on himself to go out there and make a play, and then that would start a snowball effect.
Right.
And that also factors into what I would just, a negative snowball effect. Yeah. And that's where you'd see the games like the Louisville game last year, where it's like, now he's like, well, now I gave that team a points. I got to go get it back. Like, no, you don't. Just run the offense. You're going to be all right. You've got a team around you that can support you. The moment the Sam Hartman embraces that aspect of it, I think is when he's going to really be hard to defend, because he's going to understand, hey, we don't have to score every time we get the football, right? We're okay. Let the defense do their thing. I think it's going to be important.
Yeah, and I think you make a really good point there that I want to extrapolate on a little bit. I think that regardless of what some articles say about Wake Forest having multi-1,000-yard, receivers and all of that, and Notre Dame hasn't had any, that kind of a thing, he's got more talent here than he had at Wake Forest on both sides of the ball throughout the entire roster. And he doesn't need to be the Superman. And that's going to be a tough – once he gets between the lines, like, yes, academically, he knows that, right? You sit him down in May and you have that conversation. He knows that. Like that, yes, we got more talent here, no doubt. It's when he steps between the white lines of the field and is playing the game and something goes wrong, or, Notre Dame is behind, or going into a big game at Clemson, or whatever the case may be, right? For him not to have the mentality of, I got to do this myself. Like, I've got to be the guy. That's going to take, I think that's going to take a little bit of time, to be honest with you. And I'm hoping that it doesn't take enough time that it's detrimental to the team, but that he realizes when he's between the lines that, hey, I just need to get the ball where it needs to go and let my guys do some work. Or I need to get us into a position where I can hand the ball off and let these guys do the work. Like, that I don't think that's going to be an overnight thing. I really don't. Maybe I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong. I just, with the mentality that he's had to have the last 5 years, it's going to be a tough thing to shake right away. You know what I mean? That's going to be interesting to see for sure.
So I think another piece to this that I'm curious to see is how does he use his legs at Notre Dame? Because there's a big difference between how he used his legs last year and this year. Or 2021 compared to 2022. Does he find that sweet spot? Because one thing I'd like to say is I don't want to see him running a whole lot. I want to see him running when it's smart. Mm-hmm. Don't take hits, don't take shots. But that's another part too, is how much does he use his legs and what's his comfort level? And then the final piece, Vince, is there is still, I think you nailed it. There's still an adjustment period. He still is learning a new offense, and he's got it down much more now than he did before, and he's going to be fine. But how quickly does it take? Because when you're still learning an offense, it's hard to focus only on your teammates. Right. Once the offense clicks, then he can just focus on his teammates. Sure. And that's going to be the key.
So let's move down the depth chart. At the moment, as we exited spring, going into the summer, Steve Angeli is the number 2 quarterback with the departure of Tyler Buckner to the transfer portal. So let's talk a little Steve Angeli. Steve Angeli, this will be his 2nd year in the program, if I'm not mistaken. He is going to be a redshirt freshman officially, did not play in 5 games last year. So he's a redshirt freshman, 0 pass attempts in the collegiate game. So never had really an opportunity to get out, even though he was the 2nd string quarterback for 3/4 of the season last year, which I think, by the way, it was an invaluable thing for him to at least get 2nd team reps pretty much all last year. Even though he didn't get on the field, he was able to take those reps and get at least that part of the experience down when that would not have been the case had Tyler Buckner been healthy all season.
Right.
So he's got that going for him. So let's talk some positives about Steve Angeli, who he is as a quarterback, who he is within this offense. Does the offense have to change if all of a sudden he's thrust into action? If Sam Hartman goes down, is it going to be the same offense? Is it going to be an adjustment?
No.
Who is Steve Angeli, Brian?
I don't know that we necessarily know the answer to that yet.
I agree.
To be honest with you. The reason I say that is again, this is a young man that played at a very good high school team, was known as a great leader for that team, but I believe had 1,785 yards or something like that passing as a senior. If I'm correct on those numbers, I mean, he's not a guy that threw the ball a ton in high school. He's a guy that managed the offense. I think that's what you would be hoping that he would do.
Yeah.
At Notre Dame. Yeah. He is his senior season. He threw for 1,709 yards and 15 touchdowns as a senior. As a junior, he threw for 945 yards and 6 touchdowns. So we're talking about a kid that in his high school career as a starting quarterback threw for about 2,600 yards and 21 touchdowns his high school career.
Right.
That's not even a good season for CJ Carr.
Right.
Or Kenny Minchy. Kenny Minchy had more than that as a junior in high school.
Right.
And so it's that lack of experience. But what I think he has shown is he's a poised kid. He's a confident kid. He's got good arm strength. His ball placement is not great, but he's willing to take some chances. We see in some of the practices we saw a little bit. He throws a nice deep ball in high school. I haven't seen him throw a deep ball at Notre Dame. I can't remember him throwing a deep ball in the blue gold game either year, but he threw a nice deep ball in high school. Gets up, gets down pretty quickly. Highlights. So I only saw the highlight version of it.
Sure,
but he's got the arm strength to throw the ball down the field. That is one thing that I think is a little bit different than Steve Angeli compared to Drew Pine. Is you can still throw the ball down the field if Steve Angeli is your quarterback. And actually, I would say I right now I probably have a little bit more confidence in Steve Angeli throwing the downfield ball than I would Kenny Minchy, who's got a little bit of a different delivery and was more of that intermediate stuff. He can throw the deep ball, but Steve's got a little bit more of the body type for that early on. He'll have a year of experience. So I think you have to change your offense if he has to take over. but it doesn't mean you have to go back to what you were in 2022. I think you can still throw the ball down the field. I think he is a kid that can run. I think he's a mobile kid, so you can do some bootleg stuff to let him get out. He throws the ball well in the run.
Agreed.
I think he's a kid that you can let him, move, and if they drop, he can tuck it and run and pick up 6, 7, 8 yards. And so those are all aspects of who Steve Angeli can be as the quarterback if his number is called. The questions, Vince, are, can he throw the ball accurately? And that was a question mark for in high school. Is he and now when I refer to accuracy and when Vince refers to accuracy, we're not talking about completion percentage, because as a junior in high school, his completion percentage was not great. He completed 59.5% of his passes, but his completion percentage as a senior was a lot better. He completed 68.2% of his passes. He threw a lot of quick game. But it's not about accuracy, Vince. As you and I both know, it's ball placement.
Right.
And that's something that's always been a bit of a concern for me, because a ball that you complete in high school on the back shoulder of a receiver running an out cut is a pick six or a pick in college against a good team, right? So it's not about completing passes. It's about, can you put the ball where it needs to go? We saw throws last year. I mean, trying to remember what game it was. Drew Pine threw an out cut to Michael Mayer that if he leads Michael Mayer, it's picked or he gets drilled. But he threw it behind him, and Mayer had to turn around, catch it, get tackled for 7 yards. That's good ball placement. That's where that ball needs to be. When you watch Sam Hartman throw the deep ball, there was like so in the film breakdown I showed, Vince, one of the things in the Florida State game is on one play, the cornerback was inside of him, and he just dropped it right over top of the outside shoulder. On the next deep ball I showed, the cornerback takes away the outside. So A.T. Perry dips inside and then tries to stack him, but the corner kept staying outside. So Sam Hartman threw the ball on his inside shoulder and let him catch it. And you're like, that's great ball placement. That's just not just throwing it up and letting him. That's great ball placement. And I think that's something that Sam Hartman does incredibly well, that right now is a big question mark for Kenny Minchy. If he can improve that part of his game, then I'll have a lot more hope and faith in Steve Angeli. The final piece, and we saw this in this year's Blue Gold game, Vince, he's got to speed up his decision-making big time. Like, his numbers in the Blue Gold game were very misleading, because there were a lot of throws he did not make in order to take checkdowns. And he made some really nice throws on the run, and all that stuff was great. Sure. But those first reads were there a lot, and he was rushing through his reads way too fast, and wasn't willing to see and hit the throws on time to get the ball out. Not unexpected of a kid who's in his second, he's going into his redshirt freshman season. This isn't like this is who he's going to be the rest of his career. I don't know the answer to that. But if we're talking about him being a starting quarterback, that's something he's going to have to get a lot better at.
Right.
Now, benefit for him is, at least in fall camp, I expect him to get a ton of number 2 reps in fall camp. Now, I think him and Minchy will probably split those a little bit. But you're splitting number 2 and number 3 reps as opposed to before guys were only splitting the number 3 reps. So they're going to get all the reps with 2 and 3 in fall camp. So both of them are going to get a lot more reps this fall compared to where they were in the spring. That, Vince, should be big, because as you know, with young kids, the best thing to do is just let them see it as much as you can see it in practice.
Sure. Well, that's my biggest takeaway from who Steve Angeli is right now on May 30th versus where he was, let's say, even a year ago, right? Because we get access to spring ball, we get access to some fall camp, and then we don't get access again until spring ball the next year. And so there was a noticeable difference for me from fall camp Steve Angeli to spring ball 23 Steve Angeli. Throwing the ball with a little bit more zip, gotten a little bit bigger. You can tell he's more confident. Those are all great things, and those all come with just the natural maturation process of a quarterback on campus, right? He just finished his freshman year. He just finished his freshman year academically. A lot has been going on for him, right? And he was taking number 2 reps all during the fall, pretty much, after game 2 or 3, he's taking number 2 reps the rest of the year. He used those to his advantage. There's no doubt in my mind based on what I saw in the spring from Steve Angeli. Now, I was looking at Steve Angeli as the number 3 quarterback too. So, I mean, it skews my vision of who Steve Angeli is, right? I remember thinking as we were watching him in the spring, yeah, Steve's looking a lot better. He's again more confident, he's throwing the ball harder. Accuracy still a bit of an issue, but it gotten better. Like he's going to do well as the third team quarterback. This is great. This is a great spot to be. It's going to be good. Now all of a sudden he's the number 2 quarterback. So you have to look at it with different glasses on, right? With a different vision. The Steve Angeli I see that I remember seeing in the spring that I'm excited to see in the fall, I'm going to be looking at him as the number 2 quarterback. He didn't give me number 2 quarterback vibes in the spring. Okay. Yes, he got better from the early fall to the spring. No doubt about it. But he wasn't number 2 guy. Like he was the number 3 guy, and I was happy with that. How much can he get better between now and fall camp and then throughout the year if his number has to be called? That's going to be a big question mark moving forward. And I'm not saying he can't do it. I'm just saying I haven't seen it with my own eyes yet. And, I need to see it. I need to see him kind of take the reins of that number 2 job if that is, in fact, where he ends up being. I need to see it. And I think he can get there. Mm-hmm. I just don't know if he's going to be ready to get there this year. And that's what worries me about the depth chart, right? And again, like you had said a while back in this show, if you took Steve and Kenny and you just advanced them a year, we feel a lot better about this year. And I feel the exact same way. And that's the point that I'm making. I think he's on a certain trajectory right now. And his trajectory to me is he's the number 3 guy this year. But
should be, yeah.
That's not reality at Notre Dame right now.
Well, it may be. It's not right now.
Well,
but it still
you know what
be,
I mean. Like,
and we'll get to there here in a second.
Absolutely. So I don't dislike Steve Angeli. I don't. If you're asking me if I think that he can be the starter on a Notre Dame team that's going to win a national championship, the answer is no for me right now. And things can change,
especially in 2023, and that's
and that's unrealistic. Right? In my mind, that's unrealistic to even anticipate that would be the case, right? So he's light years behind Sam Hartman, and again,
he's like, to your point, Vince, he's 4 years less experience than Sam Hartman.
Absolutely, it's expected. I'm not saying that as a dig on Steve. That is not my goal here. It's just a reality. He's 4 years behind the starting quarterback. And there's nothing in between. Like that's the problem with the depth going into this year. And, again, we're going to see what he can do in the fall. I expect him to take another small step. He just needs to take a big step just based on the way the depth chart is right now.
Yep. I think the last piece with Steve Angeli is, I'll just say this. You always want to be wrong when you don't think highly of a kid. But I think that this is one that I really want to be wrong about. Because, number one, it's important for Notre Dame. They need him to be better than I think he is.
Yeah.
Number two, you don't have to spend a lot of time around Steve Angeli to be like, this is a super likable kid.
Oh, yeah.
Like a super likable kid. And you want kids like that to be better. So I actually think the arm strength is good enough. I think the athleticism is good enough. I just wonder if the arm talent is good enough. And there's a difference. And this will be the year, if Steve Angeli is the guy that other people think he is, he's going to seize hold of this opportunity and make it a no-doubter who the number 2 quarterback is on this football team. But he's going to have to hold off a pretty talented player, Vince, and that leads us into the 3rd quarterback.
Correct. So let's talk about Kenny Minchy. Kenny Minchy, true freshman, came in early, had the spring. There's no doubting his stature. Who he is as a physical specimen, as they say, right? Coming into his freshman year, it always amazes me what some of these kids look like when they're supposed to be, finishing their second semester of their senior year in high school, and yet they're out here, banging heads with college players. Physically, eye test, he fits right in, right? He fits right in. I would say, and again, this isn't. I don't like to preface this, but I still do because people are going to think I'm a Kenny Minchy hater or something like that. He was a early enrollee freshman in the spring. He looked like he was drinking out of a fire hose at times. Yeah. I mean, he just did. And that's 100% to be expected, especially at the quarterback position.
Sure.
Because you can't just go out and be athletic like you can at some other positions, right? Like the wide receivers, for example. You've said it a million times. One of the easiest positions to come out and be effective in early is at wide receiver. This is quarterback. This is different, right? So he was drinking out of a fire hose. He's going to learn a ton mentally between the end of spring and the beginning of fall and then throughout fall camp. There's going to be a huge jump in what he recognizes, what he sees, all of those different things. And I expect that, right? His physical tools, to me, are undeniable. When he knows where he wants to go and he has conviction in where he wants to go, that ball comes out hot and it comes out accurate. And it's exciting. I like watching Kenny Minchy play the game of football, okay? When he's on. The big question going into the fall is he going to be more on than Steve Angeli?
Well, because I know you listened to the video that I did with Tim O'Malley last week.
Yes, I did.
And that's one of the things that Tim, and I had heard this, but not as strongly as he did, but he had heard that Kenny Minchy was really good in the Jersey scrimmage the week before the spring game. And I had heard he played well, but he was also he played against the threes. But you start saying, well, that's the environment you want to be in. I can't evaluate him at all based off the blue gold game.
Right.
Because he just had no time to throw the football. I mean, it was not good. And so to me, when I look at him, he's got special arm talent. And one of the things we heard from Malik Zaire, from Trent Dilfer, from a lot of people that were at the Elite 11 game that have been around Kenny Minchy, I'll say this, and now since he's gone, but I had a couple conversations with Tommy Reese about Kenny Minchy, and one of the things that they all rave about is this is one of the smartest kids you're ever going to meet at quarterback. Like his ability to take in and process information is exceptional. And even though he's got really good arm talent, like he plays even better at the high school level as a junior anyway. He was good as a senior when he was healthy. He just was hurt. But as his arm strength got better, he became a really good quarterback because he's so smart. The anticipation that he has as a quarterback is exceptional. I mean, there was a play, Vince, you remember the breakdown we did on him where he throws like an over route and he drops down and he throws it. And I'm like, where the heck is he throwing that ball? And then on the screen, you see some receiver kind of coming across and he just runs right into it. And you're like, that's a junior and college throw, not a junior and high school throw. His anticipation is outstanding. And so when I see those things, it's like, I'm really curious to see how much Kenny is going to benefit from the extra reps he's going to get this summer and in the fall, because the summer reps are big too, Vince. And these kids report this next week, they report. He's going to get a ton more 7-on-7 reps because those are now being split up between 3 and 4 guys instead of 5 or 4, depending on how many you give to Dylan, the fourth string kid. So, and then also Sam Hartman's got to be smart this summer. You can't go out there, especially with the injury he had last year. If you believe what they report his injury was, then that's another one where you can't overdo it this summer. Get your work in, get your throws in, but hey, let Kenny and Steve get these reps, these extra reps. You know what I mean? Those things are going to benefit them a ton too. I'm very curious to see the kind of jump Kenny can or cannot make, Kenny Minchy can or cannot make in that regard with those extra reps, because the arm talent is outstanding. I mean, you made a comment, is Steve Angeli a guy that can lead you to a championship? I don't know the answer to that. I do believe that Kenny Minchy has the physical and mental tools to do that. That doesn't mean he's ever going to put it all together. We don't never know the answer to that.
Right.
But there's nothing he lacks other than just, I wish he was 2 inches taller, that I can really point to and say, and he doesn't have a bazooka for an arm, right? I'll say that. His arm isn't like a rocket, but his anticipation is such, and you're talking about elite ball placement. Those things are such that they overcome the fact that he doesn't have a rocket arm. He's got a good arm, but he doesn't have like a rocket arm. He doesn't have, but neither does Sam Hartman.
Right.
And it gets by on decision-making, timing, accuracy. If you can do that, and you've got the studs that you're going to have around you, that Notre Dame is going to have around you his entire career, Kenny Minchy's a kid you can win with. You can win a lot with. Now, the question is, Vince, will that be as a true freshman?
And
that's the question.
because we're talking about the depth chart for this year, right? And
Correct.
so will his physical gifts and his ability to understand the offense be enough to push him into that number 2 spot at the end of the fall? I don't know. We always talk about positional battles and all of those different things. Look, there's no battle for who's going to be the starter. That's locked in. The battle, and in this particular position, is going to be for the number 2 spot. They're going to battle it out. Somebody's going to be 2, somebody's going to be 3. And just because it's that way on August 26th when they head over to Ireland doesn't mean that's the way it's going to be, the 12th game of the season either. Just want to throw that out there. I think this is going to be a season-long battle that could go, and maybe not on our depth chart that we get every week at the games, that kind of a thing. But I think it could go back and forth throughout the season depending on who's having, the better week or whatever. So the biggest question with Kenny, in my opinion, is can those physical gifts give him enough to push him to the number 2 spot this year?
Right. That's what we don't know.
Yeah.
And that's the concern, Vince, as I said and as you reiterated. If these guys both had an extra year under their belts that we have now, we're done with this conversation a half an hour ago.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
And so you feel good about where you are. And you just are.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's sort of the breakdown part, Vince. Let's kind of have some fun with this. This is a segment we're gonna do, and it's kind of quick things, right? Number one is, what are we most confident in, and what are the biggest question marks that we have about the quarterback position going into 2023? So I'll let you start, Vince. What's the one thing that you're most confident in going into this season when it comes to the Notre Dame quarterback position?
Well, what I'm most confident in is that Sam Hartman is going to get the entire offense involved. He's going to spread the ball around. I mean, one of our biggest complaints, obviously, last year was Michael Mayer. I get it. Michael Mayer's a really good player. But everybody in the stadium knew when Michael Mayer was going to get the football. And
it wasn't that there was a problem. I mean, Michael Mayer should have touched the ball a ton. There just was times where it's like, it was clear he wasn't the primary read, and you still went to him anyway, and the primary read was open.
Was wide open.
That's
wide open.
Yeah.
Yes. And so I feel like Sam Hartman is going to come in, and not only is he going to push the ball down the field and do all of those awesome things, he doesn't have necessarily any favorites. He's going to run the offense, so to speak. He's going to go through his reads. And if that's not obvious right now, go back and look at the blue gold game.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't picking favorites. I mean, he's throwing to Matt Salerno. He's throwing to Great
House.
He's all over the place, right? True. A kid who's 6 years younger than he is. Yeah, he's open. I'm throwing him the ball. Like, that is who Sam Hartman is going to be. He's going to fulfill what the offense should look like, right? He's going to get everybody the ball who needs to get the ball when they need to get the ball. And it doesn't matter who it is. If they're wearing the same color jersey and they're open, they're going to get the ball. I just feel like this offense is now going to be a sideline to sideline and line of scrimmage to end zone offense because Sam Hartman is at the helm.
Yep. I'm with you on that. I think the thing that I'm going to go with, I think that what I'm most confident in about this quarterback position is we will see a much more aggressive level of play from the quarterback position than we've seen in a long time. I think this is going to be the most aggressive quarterback play we've seen since 2015 when DeShone Kizer threw the ball down the field a lot. And so I think that's sort of one of the things I'm very confident in. Like if you go back, actually, if you kind of look at it, we talked about, the production throwing the ball down the field. I mean, if you go back and look at 2015, Malik Zaire attempted 4 passes of 20 yards or more, and he had 155 yards and 2 touchdowns in a game and a half throwing the ball down the field. And then DeShone Kizer had he threw for 817 yards on deep balls, 9 touchdowns, 2 picks. He wasn't as accurate, but he threw the ball down the field. And then, so even then you were 57, 58 attempts, right? And that's with Will Fuller. They're going to have more than 60 attempts throwing the ball down the field vertically this year. You know what I mean? And 20-yard attempts are not just go routes and seams. It's the deep overs. It's the sail routes. It's the corner routes. It's double posts. It's things like that we're going to see a lot more of too, Vince, that count as 20 yards down the field or more. So I think those are things that we're going to see that I'm pretty confident we're going to see in this offense. What's the biggest – I mean, I think we kind of discussed this, but what's the one big question mark that you have on offense? For me, it's if Sam Hartman goes down, I don't know that they have a guy that can they have guys that can get him out of a game.
Yeah.
I don't know if they have guys can if you miss Sam Hartman for a week and you've got somebody other than Ohio State, USC, they can win you that game.
Right, sure.
Do they have a guy that can get them through 4? Because there's not a 4 or 5 game stretch where you don't play one of those teams.
Right.
The way that your schedule's set up. If you have a 5 game stretch this year, a 4 game stretch this year where you're missing your quarterback, there's no way you can avoid Ohio State, Clemson, or USC unless the 4 games you miss are 1 through 4.
Right.
And
right.
So
and he's still going on the road to NC State, which is not easy pickings.
No. And Tony Gibson's not a guy you want to face. The defensive coordinator is not a guy you want to face with a young, inexperienced quarterback.
Right.
Right. And so that's my biggest concern is if something happens to Sam Hartman for an extended period of time, my expectations for this football team go down.
Oh, they change completely. I mean, they do. They change completely. I was going to kind of touch on something that I said earlier, and that and it's not even my biggest concern because that just makes it sound negative, and I don't necessarily want to go that route. But my biggest concern is how long does how long does it take Sam Hartman to realize that it says ND right here and not WF? You know what I mean? How long is it going to take him to realize what he's got around him and trust those guys to go out and make plays? Just do your job, Sam. You do your job, Sam, and you could be sitting at New York.
So this is what it's like having 2 first-round draft picks at offensive tackle protected.
Right.
Okay, this is weird.
Yes. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like that's
because to your point, Vince, that's the key though. He had full faith in the pass catchers at Wake Forest. Full faith. Where he didn't always have faith was in the offensive line because he had happy feet a lot because he'd get hit a lot, so he couldn't set his feet and throw in rhythm. He'd have to kind of, rush things, and it would affect his accuracy and some different aspects of it. He didn't trust his defense, and at times he didn't trust the run game. We can't get into a 3rd and 1 because I don't know that we can complete this. We can run the ball and move the chains. I can't afford to not get a touchdown here because we haven't stopped this other team all day. And if we don't score every time we touch the ball against North Carolina, we're not going to win.
Exactly.
That's not the case.
He doesn't have to have that mentality.
No.
He doesn't have to have that mentality. So that's going to be the thing for me. So it's kind of a positive.
Yeah, I mean, Notre Dame's 3 of Notre Dame's 4 losses last year, Vince. The opponent scored 21, 19, and 16 points. Those aren't games Sam Hartman's losing.
Right. Exactly.
I'll tell you, I had a conversation with a buddy of mine yesterday. He was like, 10-2 is the floor. And so do you think this team's going to be about the same as last year's? He goes, no, I think this team's going to be better. I said, okay, let me ask you a question, buddy. Sam Hartman's a quarterback in Notre Dame last year. What's their record? He's like, so it starts going through. He goes, well, I think they probably beat Ohio State. They definitely beat Marshall and Stanford. I don't know about USC. So you just said last year they'd be 11-1. Basically the same schedule, but 2 of the 3 teams are at home. And, at worst 10-2 last year. At worst 10-2 last year. And now you're telling me that even though you think Notre Dame's going to be a better team this year, that their record is going to be exactly what it was last year. And he's like, well, I think, and it came down. He just doesn't want to get too excited. I mean, that's what it comes down to.
I get that. 100%.
Totally get that.
Yeah.
Totally get that.
Yep.
But the point is that the excitement is coming from who Sam Hartman is as a football player. And I think those are areas where it gets down to he's got to be healthy for this team to reach its potential.
Absolutely.
And
he's got to, and honestly, yes, he can go down for one game if it's not one of the big 3, and you can probably get your way out of it. Yeah. Agree with that wholeheartedly. But he's got to be healthy the whole season. I mean, he's got to be. He's got to be.
Now, Vince, you wanted to do sort of confidence projections. So explain what that is.
Sure.
And then we'll do those.
So for
as
me,
we wrap this up, this part of it up.
So
we will do a mailbag, Roy. We will do a mailbag afterwards. So if you have mailbag questions, go ahead and get those in.
So for me, when I was thinking about a confidence thing, I was thinking of all the position groups, where do you rank them confidence? Like, what do you have the most confidence in from that positions group, top to bottom? Where does the quarterback position fall for you of all the position groups for Notre Dame, offense and defense? Where does the quarterback position fall for you? So I can see you writing down over there. So I'm going through this in my head. Offensively, and this changed for me.
Vince, can we go two ways? Can we do starter and depth?
Yeah, absolutely. Because that does change it, obviously, because I was just going to say this changed for me when Tyler Buckner hit the transfer portal. I was very confident in the quarterback position from a depth standpoint until he hit the portal. And as we've discussed over the last, hour and 40 minutes, that has changed. And our confidence in the depth has been shaken to a degree, right? So, yes, let's do starters first. So of all the position groups, from a starter's standpoint, where does the quarterback position fall for you?
For me, it's one.
Yep.
It is. It was a debate between three positions: quarterback, cornerback, and offensive line.
Okay.
The reason I'm going here is obviously with those positions, there's multiple guys, right? And so here's why basically what comes down to for me. The reason, so I looked at, corner and O-line, who do I have more confidence in? And ultimately, when it comes to starters, it's the cornerback position right now because we still don't know who all the stars are going to be for the Notre Dame offensive line, right?
Absolutely.
But then it's like, now it's corner and quarterback. And then what does it come down to? It's Cam Hart's health. If I was fully confident that Cam Hart was going to be 100%, then this would be a much tougher discussion for me. Cornerback is clearly number one on defense. But if Cam Hart was healthy, then he would be the guy. Having said that, if Cam Hart was healthy, meaning he didn't get hurt against Boston College, I don't know that Cam Hart's still on the Notre Dame football team. He might have gone pro.
Very good point.
And so quarterback is number one in my confidence going to season because I fully expect Sam Hartman to be very good. The question is, will he be a national championship caliber quarterback? That I don't know because we haven't seen him do that yet. Look, he did very well at Wake Forest last 2 years. Led them to 19 wins the last 2 years. 11 led them to 11. Guys, they won 11 games in 2019-21, giving up 29 points per game. Right? And so, to me, Notre Dame last year won 9 games, giving up basically 23 points per game total and like 21 and change defensively. And we're all losing our minds about how bad the Notre Dame defense was last year and the way people talk about it. So quarterback is number one for me. Depth-wise, it's number 8.
Ooh.
Yeah. And maybe lower. And honestly, the reason that I would say the reason it's 8 is because I have safety lower right now because of injuries and unknowns. I don't know when Antonio Carter is going to be. I'm excited about it, but I really don't know until we see him, go out there and play that position. Because it's not like I can watch Rhode Island film and say that's exactly what he brings to Notre Dame defense because he's not playing the same position at Notre Dame that he's going to be playing that he played at Rhode Island. I don't have a lot of faith in DJ Brown in the big games. And then, of course, the 2 freshmen are both coming off injuries. So safety is lower. And then the other position that's lower right now for me, Vince, is tight end, to be honest with you. Tight end
so
and
much
running
injury
back are all
questions.
in it. Yeah, and that's my issue at running back is I love the talent there, but the injury history is a big question mark. So 8 is where quarterback is. You could argue 7 because of the injury problems. I love the talent at tight end. I love the talent at running back behind the starters. I just have major question marks about the health of those positions. So that's kind of where I'm at with my confidence level in the depth chart at Notre Dame. Just because quarterback's not necessarily a position you want to have a bunch of inexperience. And for me, I just have to be honest. I'm just not as high on Steve Angeli as some other people are. I really hope I'm wrong. I would love for Steve Angeli to make me look bad, when it comes to this prediction. I'm just being dead serious.
Right. No, I know you are.
I just have never seen anything from his high school film, his camp circuit workouts, or anything that we've seen in practices or spring ball that makes me think what other people say about him is who he is and not what the film says he is. And I hope he does prove me wrong. And I hope these opportunities help him to get to that level. I just haven't seen it yet. And I don't want to have to throw a freshman out there, a true freshman out there.
Sure.
And have to say, hey, we're playing Bama or Georgia or Clemson or Ohio State or USC or Oregon or whoever, and we got a true freshman quarterback that we got to trot out there. Talking about, looking at the matchup for Notre Dame, and that's just not where I'd want to be honest with you.
Yeah, when you consider depth, when you take that into account, again, losing Tyler Buchner was huge. It would still be probably number one for me if Tyler Buchner was still here. But now that drop off to whoever it is, and it's not a knock on either one of the guys that's next on the depth chart. It's whoever it is. Neither one of them have thrown a college pass. So you're looking at zero experience behind the starter, right? I have them at 7. You can make a case for 6. I think you can make a case for 8, right in that neighborhood. I agree with you with everything you just said. I want to rehash everything that you said. Right now, I had tight end and safety behind them. Tight end for not only is there injury question marks at tight end, because there obviously is, but there's also playing time. Like there's just not a lot of experience at tight end right now. That worries me. And then obviously safety is a numbers game, and that's a major issue right now. So they're at 7 for me.
Okay.
They dropped from 1 to 7. Yeah, they dropped from 1 to 7.
Last one, Vince, before the mailbag. This is a little bit of fun. We're going to do bold predictions with each position group breakdown. Bold predictions are meant to be just that, bold predictions. So saying like Audric Estime is going to rush for 1,000 yards is a prediction. It's not a bold prediction.
Right.
He rushed for 922 last year and was in a rotation. So bold predictions are meant to be a little bit like, wow, okay, that's interesting. That's a little bit all right. So that's what a bold prediction is going to be, Vince. So when it comes to the quarterback position, what is your bold prediction for the 2023 season for Notre Dame?
So of all the stats that Sam Hartman has put up in the past, and we obviously had talked about a bunch of those during the show, I just don't know that his stats are going to be as gaudy. I think he'll be more effective, but I don't know that they're going to be as gaudy because of the Notre Dame run game. And we know that Marcus Freeman still wants to run the football. Like this is going to happen, right? We know that is the case. I still believe, though, that Sam Hartman is going to account. And I don't know how bold this is. I still think he's going to account for over 40 touchdowns total, rushing and throwing. I think he goes over 40. So I don't know if that's bold enough, but that's where I'm at with my bold prediction.
My bold prediction is going to be that Sam Hartman is going to be in New York at the end of the season. I'm not saying he's going to win it,
right?
But I'm saying he's going to be there,
right?
And I'm obviously referring to the Heisman Trophy ceremony. That's what bold predictions are supposed to be, right? Like, absolutely. Okay, that's there. Because the way I look at it is Ian Book finished like 9th in Heisman Trophy voting in a year we threw 15 touchdown passes.
I use this stat all the time. All the time.
And if Sam Hartman has 40 total touchdowns, so let's say it's like 34 passing and 6 rushing. That's, something like that.
Yep.
He's going to be to get there, he's going to be over 3,500 yards passing, I would think, to get there. 3,500 yards passing in the regular season is not a ton of yards per game. It's 291.2 yards per game. We've seen Notre Dame quarterbacks do that in the regular season. Ian Book averaged that in the regular season in 2018. So I think he's going to have that. I think he's going to be at least around there. I think he's going to be over 3,500 yards of passing. I think he's going to be close to 37, 38 and around 40 total touchdowns. But the other thing, too, is Notre Dame's going to be really good. I think the fact that his numbers won't be super gaudy, like I don't see him being a 4,000-plus yard passer, although I'd love to see it. I mean, because that means Notre Dame's going to be really freaking good because they are going to run the football.
Yeah.
It means they're going to be averaging like 10 yards an attempt like Ohio State did a couple years ago. So you look at that and you say, okay, I think that's going to be one of those things where he's just not going to have quite the gaudy numbers to get him to where he can win it. But I think he's going to be in a situation where he's going to have a gaudy enough numbers to where he can at least be there.
It's going to be interesting, though, because I agree with you. I think he's going to be sitting in New York because I think a lot of that has to do with the team success.
The team, exactly.
Yeah. And I don't know that he's going to need the gaudy numbers to win it. And I'm not saying he's going to win the Heisman. What I am saying, though, you need that quote unquote Heisman moment. Right? There's going to be a lot of opportunities for Sam Hartman to have a Heisman moment. If you look at the big games that are going to be on his schedule, when they are going to be played, prime time, right? At night, the whole deal, right? He's going to have a lot of opportunities to have those Heisman moments where I don't know that he's going to have the gaudy numbers, but there's going to be a lot of highlights.
Yeah.
And I feel like that may be enough if the team success equals.
It just depends on who else is in the conversation.
Fair enough.
If it's because you look at CJ Stroud last year. CJ Stroud at the end of the season threw for 3,688 yards, and that included the bowl game. I mean, he threw for 348 yards, so he was at 3,420 yards and 37 passing touchdowns at the end of the regular season. I could easily see Sam Hartman there.
Absolutely.
And the other part of it is like, but it's going to have to be the efficiency. So like the thing is one thing, you look at Sam Hartman's statistics at Wake Forest, they did throw the ball a ton. And his yards per pass attempt weren't great. Although this past year was his best year. He was at 8.6, but he was 8.1 in 2020, 8.3 in 21, and then 8.6 this past year. Isn't bad at all. You want to see him at least be minimum 8.6. You want to see him be closer to 9 or above. I think Ian Book was at like 8.9 in the regular season in 2018 when he averaged about 3. Yeah, I think Ian was at like about. If you take Ian's games where he wasn't a starter out, I think Ian was at like 292 during the regular season, and it was like 8.9 per attempt in 2018. Those are numbers that got CJ Stroud there. But the thing is but if the guy that he's also battling against has got 4,500 yards passing and 45 so I mean there is some level to that, and
sure.
But the question is, but who would that be? Well, is it going to be Caleb Williams? Well, if Caleb Williams throws for 700 more yards than Sam Hartman and has 7 or 8 more touchdowns, but Sam Hartman outplays him in the game that they play against each other and Caleb struggles, then Sam will get it. But if Caleb has 4,500 passing yards and Sam has 37 and Caleb has 45 touchdowns and Sam has 35 to 40 touchdowns and Notre Dame beats USC, but Caleb Williams still balls out, it's just his team's not as good, then he will and probably should still get the Heisman again if it comes down to that kind of discussion, right? Sure. That's kind of where I'm coming from, is even though I don't think there's a desire to give a guy a back-to-back national championship, Heisman Trophy, if it comes down to it, USC's offense is just by nature going to produce a lot more numbers. So it would really have to be Notre Dame beats USC and Sam has to play like really outplay.
Sure. And those are the Heisman moments we're talking about,
correct.
Right?
You know what I mean? To your point.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. He's going to get that opportunity.
Absolutely.
Playing against Brennan Armstrong on the road in week 3 is going to be an opportunity. Playing against Ohio State at night is going to be opportunity. So, like you said, there's going to be, playing against Riley Leonard, there's going to be a lot of quarterback battles this year, too, that are going to be very entertaining, where he's going to get a chance to duel against, as I said, Brennan Armstrong. He's going to get a duel against whoever Ohio State's quarterback is going to be. He's going to get a duel against Riley Leonard. He's going to get a duel against Phil Dracovic. He's going to get a duel against
Klubnik.
His old school, Cade Klubnik, obviously. And then, of course, Caleb Williams. Mm-hmm. So there's going to be plenty of opportunities for him to have those moments. And that's what I'm looking forward to, seeing that. Now,
yeah.
But that's why we call it a bold prediction, because we don't really know how he's going to play in those games. He played phenomenal against Clemson last year. Phenomenal. He didn't play very well the first 2 years against Clemson, his first 2 starts against Clemson. So which one are we going to see? That I don't know. And that's going to be the fun of it. So, Vince, that's going to do it for this breakdown of quarterbacks. We're going to do a mailbag next, so don't go anywhere, everybody. But before we jump to the mailbag, do us a favor, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast. If you have not done so, please sign up for the message board. Show your support for Irish Breakdown. Go to the message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com and sign up today. We got some things we want to do with this company and different things we want to do, and we need your support to make that happen. So definitely go sign up for that at boards.irishbreakdown.com. So, Mr. D'Addario, it is mailbag time, my friend.
There's been some good ones. I've been kind of keeping my eye out. I'm excited about the mailbag here. So from Rob Osgood says, how much playing time, mop-up time, do you think Steve Angeli or Kenny Minchy is going to get this year?
Hopefully a lot.
I was going to say, hopefully a lot. I'm hoping that, because in the past, we just haven't seen a lot of backups get a lot of time for whatever reason, right? There was just a hesitancy to take out the starter, right? I'm hoping there's a lot more opportunity this year for that to be the case. And I'm also hoping, and Brian and I have discussed this in the past, and whether it's Steve or whether it's Kenny, it's going to be whoever the number 2 guy is. I don't see them getting down to number 3 very often, but it's definitely possible. But I would like them to get a series with the ones, more often than not just wholesale subs and he just goes in there and hands off. Like I want some quality backup time. Yes, it's mop-up time. Agreed. But give them a series with the ones or the 1.5s. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like the guys that are rotating in, maybe it's the freshman wide receivers because they're in the rotation. Awesome. Let them throw those guys. Let them actually throw the ball. Let them make some reads, that kind of stuff. I'm hoping that it's a lot more than there has been in the past. I really do.
To answer that question, Vince, I feel like we have to ask and answer another question for me. So John Leahy asks, what do you think will be the biggest difference in Jared Parker offense with Sam Hartman compared to Tommy? Well, first of all, I don't know that Tommy Rees ever had a quarterback like Sam Hartman. So this isn't meant to be a Tommy sucks and Jared Parker's great conversation. I don't know what kind of quarterback or coach that Jared Parker's going to be. I don't know what Tommy Rees would have done with a Sam Hartman. I have no clue. Neither does anybody else. We don't know. So I'm just going to go off what I think is going to be the case this year and how it'll be different. So to me, I think the one thing that I'm confident in saying about Jared Parker is this is going to be a much more aggressive offense.
Mm-hmm.
And there was somebody in the chat earlier asking about, do you think this team is, going to throw the ball down the field or are they going to try to win by controlling the game? And I'm like, well, both. I mean, that's what we're talking about. It's the efficiency part of it. But why the heck would you bring in Sam Hartman if you weren't going to throw the ball down the field? Like that would just be a stupid move.
Yeah.
It'd be like bringing in an athletic quarterback and saying, we're not going to run the option. We're going to, the read option. We're just going to throw the ball, sit him in the pocket and throw the ball all day. It'd be stupid, Vince. I mean, so why do that?
Yep.
So to me, I think we're going to see a lot more aggressive offense. I think what that's going to lead to is in some of these games against not very good teams, I actually do think we're going to see Notre Dame blow them out. I think we're going to see Notre Dame really blow out the Tennessee States, the Central Michigans, and teams like that, where they're going to really try to get big early leads and let those kids then go get some work. Now, that's what I think.
I agree. I agree. There's going to be a different mentality. The previous coaching staff had the previous head coach, however you want to say it, there was a fear of not being liked. Around the coaching community. I think that's a fair way to put it. Yeah. And and because of that, there was no like, hey, we're going to take their will here. We're going to put our foot on their throat. Whatever cliche you want to use to putting a team away when you should put them away never really happened. Because it was like that kid on the playground who just wants to be liked by everybody. Like that's the way I saw it. This is Vince's opinion. Okay. Yeah. But that's how I felt it was. I don't think that's the case currently at Notre Dame. We'll see.
I hope not.
I don't know how many opportunities he's had to do this. You know what I mean? And so let's see where we're at, but I hope that's not the case.
I really hope Coach Freeman doesn't have that let's just grind games out mentality. I really don't.
Yeah,
I really don't. I hope he understands in order to win in today's game, you got to be able to score. And also that, like I had somebody say to me recently around the program who said, look, we've got to be a team that if we're capable of beating a team by 40, we got to beat that team by 40. Right? Like that's who we need to be because you just can't turn that switch on and off. You can't just turn that switch on when you play the Buckeyes.
Right.
You just can't, run power football and do all this and be conservative and all this stuff in the regular season. But hey, when we play the Buckeyes, though, don't worry, we're going to turn it up. No. If you're capable of beating Navy by 50, then darn it, beat Navy by 50. That's not running up the score.
Right.
Running up the score is you put in your backups and you ran like a throwback pass or you're throwing bombs and, you're going for it on 4th and 2. And, that's running the score up, Vince. That's not what we're talking about here. But let those kids in, run the offense, let them throw the ball, get them a couple shots, throw in the quick game, running some RPOs, do some things like that. Get it Minchy to, let them get it out of the pocket and throw a pass or two. And say, hey, look, when those guys are in the game, our job is to score. And we may be a little bit more methodical. We're not going to run tempo. We're going to run our 4-minute offense, but we're going to run our offense. I hope that's what Coach Freeman allows them to do. But I also hope that Jared Parker has the mentality to say, hey, we're going to go at people. Yep. And if we can beat you by 50, if we can score 70 on a team, then that's how I'm going to call a game until the head coach tells me to stop calling the game like that.
Right.
And
yes.
And that's the mentality I want to see is to not just, hey, let's just go run the clock out. We're going to blow this team out. We're just going to run the ball and limit possession so that, nothing bad happens or nobody gets hurt. No, best way to not get your starters hurt is to be up 35-42 nothing at halftime over Tennessee State and bench them for the entire second half. Not bench them, but rest them for the entire second half.
Right.
Yep. If you're capable of being up on Central Michigan 31-3 at halftime, then be up on 31-3 and then let your younger players get some time in the second half. That's what I want to see.
Yep.
It's not that hard. Like, that's what I want to see. And you're going to get some blowback for it. That's okay. You're going to get blowback for no matter what you do, you're going to get blowback.
Exactly.
This is what I've learned. Somebody's going to criticize you for something no matter what you do. So just do you and worry about your team and don't give a rip about what ESPN says or Brian Driscoll says or Tim Priester says or Vince D'Addario says or Tim O'Malley says or CBS Sports says or NBC says. Don't worry about all that. You go do you, because at the end of the day, if your team wins a championship, no one's going to give a rip what anybody said about your team. And then everybody's going to be praising you. Right?
Exactly.
And that's the key. That's what I want to see.
Stevie Wonder. Wow. Stevie's a big fan. All right, cool. What's the word on Tay Johnson? Kid must have improved his grades.
Yeah, he has. So we had a message. We had an update on the message board about this last week. This is, again, another reason why you need to be on the message board. So Notre Dame has kind of had an off-again, on-again relationship with Bronte Johnson in regard to just, the ability to get him into school and those type of things. My understanding is that Bronte is doing very well. He's doing all the things that are needed of him to be a target for Notre Dame. And spring semester grades are coming out for some schools, right, Vince? And
yes, sir.
Even though some people are in finals or you're still wrapping up, a lot of schools, you know what your grades are going to be. And so Notre Dame is back on him again. They've always liked Bronte, Vince. It's just, how much can you really invest
reality?
You're not sure if you can get him into school, but there's always been a desire, and they've been working with him. And this is what you need to do, and this is, if you want to be here, this is what you need to do. And from everything I'm told, he's doing it. He's doing what it needs him to do.
Awesome.
And so he's going to be visiting next week. Look, Vince, it's one of those things we've said all along. If Notre Dame could get Bronte into school, I think they've always been the team to beat. I mean, that's great. That's just a no-brainer. So hopefully he's doing the work and they're able to get him to school. And because he would solve so many of the problems that they have right now at safety.
Yeah.
Because the one thing about him too, Vince, is he is a pure center fielder, in my opinion, as a safety. And none of the other safeties on the board are a pure center fielder. And that would be ideal. But there's work to be done, but it would be ideal. And if it is true that he is back on the radar, I mean, how awesome for that young man.
Absolutely.
He said, screw this. I'm going to go somewhere else. But so this is where I want to be.
Yep.
You asked me to do this. I'm going to get the work done.
Given a challenge, he stepped up to the plate. Like that's massive.
Love it.
Yeah.
Says a lot about the kind of kid he is. It also says a lot about the backing he's getting at home, because making the kind of jump he needs to make is not I'm doing it all by myself thing. There's a push coming. There's a support system there that's helping him get there and encouraging him. And
Absolutely.
I think that's great.
That's Absolutely.
Great. All right. Here we go, Vince.
All right, Michael Collins, are the players fully behind Hartman, or is there some discussion in the locker room with
dissension?
I'm sorry, you're right. That says dissension. It'd help if I could read. Dissension in the locker room with Buckner's departure. Thank you.
I've heard nothing in regard to dissension in the locker room. The only people that talk about dissension in the locker room are fans. Michael, this is a fair question. I mean, it's absolutely a fair question, but I've only ever heard it from people asking this kind of question, which is, again, not mad about you asking the question. It's a good question. I have not heard. I mean, I've heard that the players have adapted well to when we've reported on the message board. Again, another reason to be on the message board. We reported midway through camp that the players had adapted to Sam Hartman really well, because he didn't come in, I'm 19 all-time in passing yards, and I'm 18th all-time in passing touchdowns, and I'm the all-time touchdown leader in ACC, and I'm the man, and I did this, and I'm that, and this is my job. He came in, kept his mouth shut, head down, put in the work, was a good teammate, was one of the guys, and the players have really come to expect him. It was a lot like last year. The players respected and would have played for Tyler, and they were respected and would have played for Sam. Just like last year. They respected Tyler and played for Tyler, and they respected Drew and played for Drew. Same thing this year. It's just look, guys, if as long as you're not a complete a-hole, if you come in and put in the work and try to develop relationships with the players, because Sam could have come in like, hey, look, man, I'm just here to win a championship, and I'm going to do my thing. I'm going to do whatever. Then you're going to be, you're going to be successful if you produce. And that's the big thing, is he produced. Thoughts on that, Vince?
Oh, I completely agree. You have context a little closer to the situation than I generally do, but I have not heard a single thing. I haven't heard about dissension in the locker room for years. To be honest with you. And it's been there in the past.
There was some dissension in the locker room last year, but you're talking about a quarterback.
I'm talking about a quarterback.
Because of quarterback.
The one I remember from quarterback was a little ways back.
16.
Right. Yes, correct.
Right.
So
there's a little bit in 18. A little bit in 18.
Well, because there was a starter and then there was a different starter.
Because of the way it was done.
Yeah.
Not so much that they didn't support Ian, but just the way that it was done. But they rallied quickly. But they respected Ian, so that's why they were able to rally and immediately start winning a bunch of football. Well, playing better football on offense.
Right.
I think that's a big part of it.
So, yeah, I think the culture in that locker room is good right now. So, Rob Osgood. Next year is going to be the question year. With Sam Hartman gone, you'll have no true experienced quarterback on the depth chart if Sam doesn't get hurt this year. How do you plan for that this year if you can?
We kind of talked about it earlier, Vince. Get those kids opportunities to play. I mean, that's the thing. It's just trying them to play. But at the end of the day, you can play them literally in the fourth quarter of every game this year, Vince. And it's not going to get them ready to
the starter.
Play Texas A&M in 2024. Right. It's just not. To a degree, folks, it's the town around you, and do you have the chops? I mean, are you just that guy? Bryce Young had zero real experience, and he leads them to a national title game in his first year, right? I mean, it's just C.J. Stroud throws zero passes as a freshman and comes out the next year and lights the world on fire. I mean, just some guys have it, some guys don't. And what we'll find out, Vince, is if Steve Angeli and Kenny Minchy have it, or if C.J. Carr has it as a freshman. So it's really just about developing them as players and people every day, getting them better about going through the reads, getting them better about going. I mean, it's just coach them up and make sure that every day you're doing the best you can to make them the best players they can be. I just read your text. So that's the big thing, Vince, is just coach these kids up every day. Because at the end of the day, that experience is only going to do so much for you. Are you getting that developmental coaching every day? And one of the big complaints we had about coaches in the past is the coaches. This was a big complaint I had about Del Alexander. Once the season started, he stopped coaching the young kids.
Right.
If Gino Guidugli only focuses on Sam Hartman this year, then the quarterback play is going to be a problem in 2024. But if Gino Guidugli coaches the entire depth chart, and this is something we used to praise Mike Elson for all the time, he coached the entire depth chart, so then they'd lose guys, and then the next guys will just step right in and they're ready to play, right? And that's something we always, with Harry Heastand, we always would see. What was one of the things Charles Jagasol talked to Sean Davis about and praised about? He's like, look, this dude coaches the second team as much and as hard as he coaches the first team, which is why you'd see Notre Dame with Heastand just year after year, some new guy emerges as that next guy.
Right.
And that's what good coaches do. And I believe Coach Guidugli will do that. But here's the thing. We don't know. I mean, he literally in all but 1 year of his career at Cincinnati coached one guy. So we really don't know his ability to do that. But I have to feel like that's something that he seems like a smart guy to me. He's got to know that that's something that's going to be important for him. And so I would think that that's going to be a focal point of what he's doing this year. That's just my 2 cents, Vince.
Yeah, the roster management is going to be interesting. You know, depending on how things look this year, how things look next year, do they hit the portal again? It's like you hate to see Notre Dame keep going back to the portal for quarterback, but with the way things have shaken, they lost 2 quarterbacks last year. You know, or this past year. You got to do something to plug that hole. So
they're going to have to go to the portal next year, Vince. I think the question is going to be, are you going to the portal for a depth piece or are you going to the portal for another starter? Right. That's going to be the question.
Yep, I agree. And a lot of that's going to have to do with the development of those 2 other guys and what they're seeing at practice all year long.
That's right.
Ben Tarnowski has a question. Where do you think Clemson will be this year in the national conversation with the addition of Garrett Riley and Klubnik, I've heard it both ways, being the starter? Do they have more holes than just OC QB play?
Every team has more than just one hole at this point in time of the season. Everybody. I think Clemson has a couple. I still don't love their defensive coordinator. I don't think he's all that great, to be honest with you. I didn't think they were really good on defense last year, Vince. I didn't feel like they maximized the talent they had on defense last year. I think their secondary is getting better, but it's still a question mark, especially safety. I think that their defensive line is I'm curious how they're going to replace Brian Bresee and Miles Murphy. Offensively, I think that they are very good at running back. I think Cade Klubnik and Garrett Riley will be a good combination. I think their offensive line, this is probably going to be one of the better offensive lines Clemson has had because they haven't had great offensive lines. They've just been steady, do their job. There's some talent there to work with. My other big question for them, I don't think quarterback and QB OC are a hole for them right now. I think Ben's referring to what it was last year. I don't think that's a hole anymore. I still have question marks about their skill players on the perimeter. There's talent there. The Williams kid was pretty good last year as a freshman. I really like Adam Randall as a young, talented kid, but he was banged up last year. I got a couple freshmen coming in that I like. But overall, you've got the kid, what was his name? There was a really fast kid that they had last year that got hurt. Let me find it. I think he was a freshman last season, and for the life of me, I cannot remember the kid's name. I think his first name was Troy, but just give me a second to try to find it, Vince. But he was a freshman last year. He got hurt, and no, it wasn't Troy. Oh, that's Wake Forest. I'm trying to find. Give me Clemson. Just give me 1 second.
I was going to say this is where
I think it's Stiletto.
This is where Ryan not sitting in this seat doesn't help you any.
No, I don't think he would have. He might. Troy Stellato, the kid who was a freshman last year, got hurt. He's a talented kid that I like. He's a guy that I think can bring some value to that receiving core. He's got some speed. So there's some young talent there, Vince, but it's a lot like Notre Dame's. It's unproven talent. And I wonder how they're going to fit into the new system. So that's a question mark, just like it is for Notre Dame. Their receiving core is very much I don't know if I like their talent as much as I like Notre Dame's, but it's close. They have good talent there. It's just how it's not. It's good talent. It's just, can they step up into the spotlight, which is, as I said, a very similar concern that I have for Notre Dame this season. So it's a very good question, Ben. Very good question.
Tommy Guns, Crocs and Glocks. What kind of growth and development, if any, can Hartman have that can be directly attributed to Gino and Parker?
Well, we kind of discussed this earlier, Vince, in the
Yeah.
question you asked me during the show, which is just the mechanical stuff. I mean, one of the
Yep.
big knocks on Hartman is he plays in a gimmicky offense. So if he can show that, hey, I can drop back, I can sit in the pocket, I can be a normal college quarterback mechanically and scheme wise, then I think that helps him a ton. And I think that's something that could obviously be directly attributed to Coach Parker and Coach Gaduli.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Because he's coming to Notre Dame to learn how to run a pro style offense, period. And if he ends up running it at a high level, you have to attribute that to the coaches.
Right. Right.
Jimmy James, do you expect a portal quarterback for this season? And would you want one?
No, I'm not sure if he's referring to another quarterback for 23 or he's looking at 24. Someone answer both.
Okay.
For 23, I would say, Vince, I'm intrigued by the idea of bringing in a portal quarterback to protect you if Sam Hartman goes down, because it's going to help you win games. But at the same time, there's the notion of you have to do what you got to do to win this year, but you also can't sacrifice next year for that. So 23 is a much tougher question than 24. If they brought in a portal quarterback, Vince, for depth, I would not be upset with them. But I also am like, but you're also guaranteeing that you're going to have to go back to the portal now next year because you're going to take those reps away from those kids and they're not going to be ready. And that's the only concern that I have.
I agree with you completely. And there would have to be a very specific boxes that would have to be checked for them to bring in one for this year. For me, it would have to be somebody with 2 years of eligibility remaining. Okay. Probably a grad transfer. If you're talking like an Ivy League person or something along those lines, you bring him in, he's a depth piece. He protects you for this year. You can say, hey, your pitch would be, hey, Sam Hartman's our starter for this year. We're bringing you in basically to be the number 2. You're going to hold a clipboard this year. You're going to help teach these younger guys. You're going to, be that guy, right? And if worst case scenario, you got to go in. We trust you to run this offense, okay? You've got another year of eligibility after this year. We're going to give you an opportunity to compete for the starting position, right? Again, that is a very specific set of criteria for me to bring in somebody for this year. If you can find somebody that hits all of that, I think you go for it. I really do. But does that guy exist? That's the bigger question. I don't know the answer to that. I probably not is the answer.
Yeah.
But that's the only way I'm bringing in somebody for this year.
For next year, Vince, it gets down to they are going to bring in a portal quarterback next year. I have no doubt about that. The only question is what kind of portal quarterback? Is it going to be exactly what you were just talking about for next year? Depth guy, veteran presence, someone to help bring him along, knowing he's probably not going to be the starter, Or is it going to be the next year's version of Sam Hartman? The reason you got to be really careful doing things that force you to go get a starter in the portal next year is you have no clue who is going to be out in the portal next year. None.
Absolutely.
And so, you may think, hey, we're going to go to the portal for a quarterback, and you have this plan and you're Florida, and it ends up with you getting Graham Mertz. And it's like, no. Or Wisconsin getting Tanner Mordecai. No. Right? Like, that's not going to win you a championship in 24.
Right.
Those are gap. I mean, they're bridges to the next guy. Yeah. I'd say just freaking play the next guy. Let him learn. You know what I mean? But that's going to be the question about who it's going to be. Is that, and hopefully they don't need to go to the portal but for depth next year, because Steve and Kenny have great years this year and they develop quickly and they're ready to go. And CJ just is like, dude, that guy's going to play.
Yeah.
I think CJ Carr is going to be a factor in that conversation too. Because if you're like, okay, his senior year was such that like we think this kid's ready to play.
Right. He's ready to compete with the other guys that are already here.
If it's going to be a depth guy, it could end up being a depth guy that they go get after spring. That way he doesn't take away reps from the younger guys in the spring. So that also adds to the conversation as well. But I have a hard time seeing them not bringing in a portal guy in the winter.
I agree.
I agree. Yeah, it's gonna be tough not to do that.
Josh Buffo, the motivational business banker. What 2 players are currently committed elsewhere that Notre Dame still has a real chance at closing? What may be some players that may be in this category soon?
I don't know that Notre Dame right now, Josh, is focused a lot on guys committed elsewhere other than Caleb Beasley. And that one's going to be he's their best chance, no question. But that's still, even then, is going to be a tough pull. I think ultimately, they're going to flip him. But I think if you were to ask him today, he'd say that dude's nuts for saying that. Like, I'm not flipping, because if he was going to flip, he would have already flipped by now.
Yeah,
right?
he'd do it.
He clearly still plans to go to Tennessee. I just think things are going to transpire that I think you're going to allow Notre Dame to win that one in the end. That's just my prediction. And that's not anything anyone at Notre Dame, no one at Notre Dame is telling me that. That's just my impression. I don't know that right now they need to focus on guys committed elsewhere. You got to really. Here's the thing about this 24 class, Vince. The uncommitted players on the board are enough for this to be an elite class. I don't know that you necessarily need to get Justin Scott, get Elijah Rushing, get Kingston Viliama Asa or Chris Cole, flip Caleb Beasley, sure, but get Bronte Johnson, get a DeJuan Lane or a Davis Andrews or a Jalen McClain at safety. Get Keedron Young at running back, get Gearby Lambert and Styles Prescott on the offensive line, get Carter Nelson at tight end, and guess what? You don't need to flip anybody.
Yeah.
The question is, but can you get all those guys? If you have misses, then you might try to flip somebody. Right now, they don't need to try to flip anybody. Land the guys that are on the board now. Do that, and this class is going to be outstanding. Don't do that, and then we're going to have some problems. So, Vince, this is one of our resident LSU fans, insured by Big.
Okay. All right. LSU in the house. Okay. No question from me today, but I'm glad to see Vince and Brian together. Always great content. Thank you very much. Wanted to show Vince my Southern hospitality. Go Tigers. God bless you. I had to read that because it's there, but
go Tigers.
Go Tigers. Go Tigers.
Go Tigers. You do it better than I do. So every time you see the words "Go Tigers" like that, you need to say
I can say it that way.
You have to. Yes,
I love it.
It's now. I'm gonna Vince. I'm gonna send you a new contract later today, and I'm gonna add this addendum to the bottom of the contract.
I love it.
Okay.
I love
this
it.
is the only change I'm going to make. If you ever see "Go Tigers" written like that, towards not like a Clemson fan, but it's an LSU guy that writes it GEAUX, you got to say it like Coach O.
Go Tigers.
There you go.
Go Tigers.
There you go. It's
love
mandatory.
Well, thank you for the compliment, insured by Big, and glad to have you around. I always love a level-headed LSU fan. I will take that all
and we like Roger Dodgers in the chat. He's a USC fan,
right?
He really adds good conversation. Antoine Johnson's a Michigan fan. He does a great job in the chat. Archer, obviously from Ohio State. So we really do have some fans of other teams that come in here and awesome. Are really. We haven't seen him in a while, but Frank McCatry is a guy that had been in our chat for a while who's an LSU fan. I haven't seen Frank in a while.
Okay.
But he was a guy that he had an LSU shirt on in his profile and everything.
Man.
So
all out for the Bayou.
Yeah, no doubt. And Jay Henry asking about Antonio Williams. Yeah, that's what I'm referring to, because EJ Williams is the kid they got a couple years ago, but he has since transferred. He's not there anymore. So, yeah, let's get up here, Vince, to Rob Osgood.
All right, Rob says, saw on the IB board, great info about the new running back transfer, Devin Ford. Can you give some more details about him? Thanks.
Well, he's a quality back if healthy. He's a guy that he has a game very similar to Chris Tyree with two exceptions. He's not as fast as Chris, and he has better balance than Chris. He's not as dynamic as Chris was, but when I refer to it, similar body type, Vince.
Okay.
But also a guy that will do a lot of the stuff that you wanted Chris to do as a running back. He's a slasher. He's a guy that can hit an inside zone for big play, can catch the ball out of the backfield. He's got some elusiveness to his game. I wouldn't call him like a super shifty guy, but he can bounce a ball outside. He can get to the perimeter.
Okay.
He can do some of those things. I think he's a guy that isn't a real big back. And so he's not a guy that is necessarily an every down back.
Okay.
He's not like I said, not as fast as Chris Tyree is. He's more quick than he is fast. But he brings some slasher to the table that if Jadarian Price isn't healthy, he can give you some of the concepts that Jadarian would have given you or Chris Tyree would have given you. I think adding him helps the running back depth chart, but it helps the receiving depth chart as well, because you are an injury away from having to move Chris Tyree back to wide receiver.
Sure.
And I think what this does is this helps you ensure that you can keep Chris Tyree at receiver, which, you don't rob from Peter to pay Paul. So they already had to do that one direction. You don't then because you do it back, because now you've really screwed the kid.
Yeah, right.
So you made the move, let the kid play there and go with it. So he's a good back. He can be a good number 2 back. Average 5 yards a carry, give you 300-400 yards in the number 2 role if the need is there. So it's a really good insurance policy. Last year, he did not get hurt last year. He just chose to redshirt last year. He did get banged up in 2020, a little bit in 2021. So I don't believe, and again, I could do I do some more research on this. I don't believe any of his injuries were like career threatening. Like he missed about a month and change in 2021, but came back at the end of the year and got a few carries. He missed the end of the 2020 season with an injury, but again, came back the next year. He's never been the same player since that 2020 injury, though. So I wonder if that sapped him a little bit of his elusiveness and explosiveness. But the other part of it, too, is Penn State recruited some really good running backs the last couple of years, too.
Like he got recruited over, that's what you're saying.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, a little bit.
From a Notre Dame standpoint, they had a couple of extra scholarships available. I mean, to me, this feels like a high reward, low risk scenario for Notre Dame. You know what I mean?
Very much so. You need 5 backs, Vince, and they had 4.
Exactly. And you, like you said, they were one move away from having to bring Chris Tyree back, and you don't want to have to do that. So they were in a position where they could make this move. And I think this kid's a good fit because he's not coming in here expecting to be the bell cow. I think he's coming in here with a level head about what this running back room looks like. You've got a couple guys coming off injury, and you don't know, and you got true freshmen. I mean, there's a lot of things going on in the running back room where there's a lot of talent, but there's still some question marks. I think bringing him in is a smart move on Notre Dame's part.
I got to respond to something, Vince. Their chat, Bernie Kaderi, great member, very excited, big Notre Dame fan. But I just got to push back on a couple things. Bernie said made this comment, and so Sam Hartman has way more weapons than CJ Stroud. Irish are going to roll. And then I asked if Bernie was joking or not, and said, not joking. Irish are loaded at receiver, just a matter of time before the world wakes up to the new reality. Bernie, with all due respect, Notre Dame has a lot of talent at receiver, and nobody's talked about that more than this channel has. But they are not as good at wide receiver as Ohio State is.
Right.
It they're just not. I mean, I'm sorry. Marvin Harrison's the best receiver in college football, in my opinion. I'm sorry. I can't go with you there. And then Bernie said Tony Rice went 23-1 and wasn't a very good quarterback. And the receivers in the 1988 and 89 team were kind of weak and dropped a ton of balls. So receiving core with Rocket Ismail and Ricky Waters was weak and dropped a ton of balls, and Tony Rice wasn't a very good quarterback. I don't really know what to say to that, Vince.
Wow.
That's coming from a Notre Dame fan.
I hadn't seen that comment. I saw the other two. I had not seen that one.
I don't really know what to say to that. I mean, that's just I'll just have to agree to disagree very strongly with that. And I
have to imagine people in the chat are disagreeing with that as well.
I haven't seen really anybody respond to it that much, but Ohio State has a much better receiving core than Notre Dame's. That doesn't mean Notre Dame's receiving core can't be excellent. I expect it to be very good this year.
I do too.
But you also have to be realistic, because if their receiving core is better than Ohio State's and Notre Dame doesn't go 12-0 this year, then you need to say Marcus Freeman's a bad football coach. Because if Notre Dame's receiving core is as good as everyone thinks that is as good as you say, then this Notre Dame team should score 45 points a game and lose to no one. No one.
Agreed.
And yeah, I just I can't go there with you on that one. I can't. Okay, so let's let's go here, Vince.
From Caleb Collins, though, I'm guessing this is supposed to be thoughts on the lacrosse championship and how far will the special teams fall off compared to last year?
So Vince, here's the extent of my lacrosse watching in my life. I have watched highlights of Notre Dame football recruits play lacrosse, so like not a full game. And the lacrosse team for the school I went to, Salisbury State, they were a great lacrosse program back then. And I went to a couple games, but it was because some hot girls that I was trying to talk to were there, and I spent the whole time talking to them.
That's fair.
So it wasn't really to watch the lacrosse game. And part of the reason I didn't like lacrosse is because the guys that played lacrosse at Salisbury were giant D-bags, if I'm just going to be honest with you.
Dude.
And so and where I'm from, there wasn't really lacrosse growing up in Ohio. I'd never heard of lacrosse. There was lacrosse in Virginia when I moved to Virginia, but it was like the really rich, preppy schools had it. The private schools had it. I was a public school kid for 2 years. And then when I went to private school, the private school I went to was like the sports private school. You know what I mean? Like our classrooms were in portables, but yet we had 2 basketball players assigned with NC State. You know what I mean? And I come home from practice one day in high school at Kempsville, and the AD sitting on my couch, talking to my parents, right? You get what I'm saying? So It wasn't exactly known for like being a wealthy school, and that's much better now. It's a much better school now. I mean, my nieces and nephew go there now, and they have real classrooms, and it's a much better school now, but still don't have lacrosse. And so it just was never on my radar. I watched some of the semifinal game between Penn State and Duke, and then I watched the Notre Dame game against Virginia and was like, this is a freaking entertaining sport, man. Like this is I guess I never realized how, like I knew lacrosse was a physical sport, right? I've talked about this in the past where like Nolan Ziegler and there's banging around, you got to wear pads. I didn't realize how physical it was at the high level, like what we saw in these 2 Notre Dame games. I mean, dudes were getting drilled. I'm like, is that like illegal? I'm like, no penalties being called. And then the more you watch it, the skill that they have, the hand-eye coordination to be able to catch and keep and throw those things is really impressive. And so to me, that's a big part of it is I was impressed with the skill that they had and the physicality they had. And I really enjoyed these 2 games. I mean, I had to DVR yesterday's game. I watched the 3rd and the 4th quarter before I hit the road to come back to Indiana because it was in Ohio. Man, and you can see there's some. I don't know what the strategy is because I don't understand the game, but you can see that there's things going on that are clearly strategic on how they're going at it. I didn't quite know what that was, but you can see when someone like I can see when basketball teams are running sets. I don't know what the sets are. I can't explain them or teach them, but I know they're running sets and things. So I was really impressed with it. I was far more entertained with the sport than I thought I was going to be. Like to the point where I'm like, you know what? I'm going to probably go to a couple of lacrosse games next year. Like take Ange to a couple of lacrosse games next year. Like I was very entertained by it. Like, and I'm like talking to my nephew. I'm like, Zachary, you need to look at them playing lacrosse. Oh, right. They don't have lacrosse there. Never mind. It's still at the rich preppy schools in Virginia Beach still apparently. But I was entertained by it, man. And of course, Notre Dame won, but not even just Notre Dame winning, but I was genuinely entertained by watching the lacrosse game. And I never thought I would say that ever. So thoughts, Vince? Did you get a chance to watch any of it?
I watched the entire game, mainly because there was literally nothing else on TV yesterday afternoon because it was a Monday afternoon. So it was like either that or Dr. Phil or, something like that. So I watched the game. I was rooting for Notre Dame because I am a Notre Dame fan through and through, and I will even root for the lacrosse team to win. I share a lot of the same thoughts as you do about lacrosse players. I'll just say that. It comes from...
That was when I was their age. That was a long time ago.
I still hold that thought as a 42-year-old man because I deal with those kids all the time in the summer. And they are still that way. So
gotcha.
They are called Lax Bros for a reason. So
you're talking about high school kids that are at the camps, correct?
Correct. And those high school kids eventually turn into college kids, but yeah,
sure.
same difference.
My point is, you're not necessarily saying the Notre Dame kids because you don't.
No, I'm not. I am not.
That's
I have never met any of the Notre Dame kids. The coaches, yes. The trainers, yes. The players, no. So I don't know. I just don't. It doesn't do it for me. Lacrosse doesn't do it for me.
Yeah.
I watched the entire game, start to finish. I learned actually a lot about the game that I didn't know because I never cared to know. And so I was actually interested in, because I like athletics. I like to watch sports and learn about them and things like that. So I learned a lot, and I was actually interested to learn it. If Notre Dame's not involved, I will never watch a lacrosse game again. It just doesn't do anything for me.
I don't know that I'll watch anyone other than Notre Dame, but I'm going to watch Notre Dame.
Okay.
Right? Like, I'm not going to be like, hey, did you see the Johns Hopkins Duke game? Oh, no, I'm not going to be doing that. But like, I'll be watching Notre Dame now. You know what I mean? Because I like excellence, but I like the physicality of the game. Sure. I like the strategy. Like, you could tell their strategy and the skill. Like the goal that the kid hit from like midfield.
Yeah.
Go up 6-1. I'm like, that's insane. Like,
that's skill.
How do you get that ball out of that thing and then to that, and it's just like, I was like, okay, these guys are athletes.
Yeah.
These are definitely really good athletes. And so and the skill that it takes to play that sport is tremendous. I mean, like, it was fun to watch. Now, am I going to be, hey, Vince, does Penn have a high school team? I really want to come watch Penn's lacrosse.
They do.
No, that will not be. I don't care.
I know.
I'm not going to be catching like the Johns Hopkins, whoever games. And I know Johns Hopkins is good because I had a kid.
They are good.
A kid that I recruited from Woodbury Forest was also a really good lacrosse player, and that was one of the angles that Johns Hopkins was pitching to him to which is why they beat me for him. Was one of them was you could come here and play Division I lacrosse as well. So
I have respect for the skill that it takes.
Yeah,
no doubt about that. As I do for a lot of things done at a high level, right? I have a lot of that, and I like the storyline between the brothers and there was a brother pair that one's on Notre Dame and one was at Duke, and then you got the Kavanaugh brothers and the whole. Like, I was all on board with all of that, and I was excited when Notre Dame won. I was happy for him, and the head coach hadn't won in 35 years, never won a national championship, and that's awesome because lacrosse at Notre Dame in 1989 was basically a club sport. You know what I mean? And like built it into a national championship program.
That's when Corrigan got hired. Okay,
yeah,
it's impressive.
So, built it into a national championship program. That's awesome. Congratulations to him. No matter what the sport is,
I enjoyed the game a lot more than you did, apparently, because I really enjoyed watching the action.
Sure.
Again, I'm only going to watch Notre Dame, just like I only watch Notre Dame softball, and Notre Dame baseball, and things like that. But I very much enjoyed it. A question that somebody had, Vince, Jeff Fluke said, do you think Notre Dame football team should have a bagpipe entrance like lacrosse team? No,
that was cool.
I don't.
That was cool though.
It was very cool.
That's cool.
That's
but
their
thing.
Yes, that's their thing.
Right.
You're Notre Dame football. You shouldn't be, stealing what other people do. Now, do I think there's some cool things that Notre Dame could do coming at you? Sure, absolutely. But like that, let them have that. Let them have that moment, because what will happen if Notre Dame starts doing that. Look at this really cool entrance to Notre Dame's football team. Like, dude, they got that from the lacrosse team. No, I don't want to see that. I want to see them figure out their own cool thing to come out to. And I would like to see them do something cooler to come out to it. I just don't want them to rip off. Now, if you want to maybe for a game this year, what would be cool is have two of the lacrosse kids leading you out for a game, and you're going to honor their championship and have them do that. Let them rock their own lacrosse. That'd be cool, but you do it once.
That's it. It's not football's thing.
Yeah. Exactly. And you do it to where you're honoring the lacrosse championship team at maybe your home opener or something like that. That'd be cool.
Yeah.
That'd be cool. But I still want the band to be playing for you when you come out of Notre Dame games, not bagpipes.
Yeah.
That's a lacrosse thing. Let them have that. That's really awesome for how they do it. But what I noticed yesterday is the entering the stadium is a little different deal for lacrosse than it is football.
Sure.
You know what I mean? So it's not something I would replicate.
I was surprised how many, one of the things about strategy, which I'll never know, and somebody can throw it in the chat or whatever. there are a ton of kids on the sidelines for the lacrosse team. Like, holy crap. And then I started kind of paying attention to like the subbing. They sub a lot. Like there's a, it's like ongoing, like kind of like hockey subs.
Like there was one time the Notre Dame kid's running down and like all of a sudden the Duke kid comes off the side. And I'm like, wait a minute, is that allowed? I'm like, well, clearly they're letting him do it.
When they passed the ball to like a kid that like literally was like 1 foot onto the field as he was coming on, he got the ball. Like it was like, oh, okay. I'm glad you knew he was coming on because I didn't know. So yeah, it was exciting. It's another national championship for Notre Dame. Yeah. It was awesome for those kids. They were obviously excited about it. It was really cool.
Yeah. All right. Let's get to some more questions here. Vince.
All right. From Bailey Brad, what are some things about the 23 Notre Dame team that you have faith will happen? And what are some things that you have to wait to see?
Well, I think Sam Hartman's going to be good. I think the offensive line's at least going to be good. I don't know if they're going to be great. I think they're going to be good. I expect Aug to be good. I think the front seven is going to be a lot better than people think. I actually have a decent amount of confidence in the defense this year that they're going to be better. The question is, how good are they going to be? Just because everybody comes back. Like, look, Brian Van Gorder's year 2 defense was much better than his year 1 defense, and he still sucked. Right? I mean, and Al Golden's a way better coach than Brian Van Gorder was. The question is, will it be a championship defense? That was always the knock last year, Vince.
Yeah.
So cornerback, I expect them to be really good. Some of the things I have to wait and see. The receivers, I love the talent, need to see the production. Tight end, love the talent, need to see the health and production. Running back, love the talent, need to see the health and production behind the starters. Those are question marks. How good is the offensive line going to be? Is what I think Jared Parker is going to do on offense what he's actually going to do on offense? That's a question mark. We don't know the answer to that. Will the defensive line be good? Yeah, I expect it to be good. Will it be championship caliber? Huge question mark. Don't know the answer to that. Is Riley Mills going to be a dominate this year? Don't know the answer to that. Here's an observation that I had too, Vince, that I find fascinating. When Notre Dame has had really veteran teams, they tend to be very good, not just because of experience, but because they're not in school anymore, the way that they are as undergrads.
Sure.
Most of the starting defense just graduated. Riley Mills graduated. Javante Jean-Baptiste is a grad transfer. Howard Cross graduated. J.D. Bertrand graduated. Jack Kaiser graduated. Maris Luafau graduated. Xavier Watts graduated in 3 years. And he walked on this past weekend. And Cam Hart graduated. DJ Brown's already graduated. Antonio Carter's a graduate player. Thomas Harper's a graduate player. That's a lot of dudes that won't be on the full 15-hour course load that undergrads are on the defense.
Never thought about that.
That needs to be discussed here as part of something that you look at and say, I wonder how that's going to impact this defense. Now, I know they're still in school, but grad school is a different animal than normal school. And I'm also curious, I want to know, and if anybody in the chat has a question for me or has the answer for me, do you all know if the exam schedule for grad students is the same for undergrads? I don't know the answer to that. But the point that I have, Vince, is that's a lot of dudes that just got done with the hardest part of their degree program that this fall won't be having the same requirements academically on defense. I think that's going to have a big impact.
That's interesting.
Big impact. I mean, the only front seven guy that I think that has not graduated of the starting lineup right now, because Nana graduated. So if it's him or Javante, one of those two will be a graduate. The only guy that I know of that didn't graduate is Jordan Patelho. That's it. So everybody else did. I mean, Ramon Henderson also graduated. So literally the only two guys that are going to be on Notre Dame's starting defense next year that have not graduated from college yet are Jordan Patelho and Benjamin Morrison. That's it.
Wow.
That's it. So that's kind of, that's kind of something I'm very interested in seeing how that's going to impact the defense next year. It just kind of hit me when I was looking at the picture of Marcus Freeman, like going left and right. Is that Riley Mills? Holy crap, he graduated. He's a junior. Like him and Xavier Watts are 2020 signees. Like they haven't even started their senior years of college yet, and they're both walking with degrees. Like, don't tell me Notre Dame kids aren't different.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
So I was like, okay, it's very interesting. All right. I'm curious how that's going to impact it. So, but we don't know. That's the thing. And that leads to that second thing, Vince, is a wait and see is what exactly impact is that going to have on the Notre Dame defense next year?
Right.
Very curious to see that. Very curious to see that. You have any thoughts on that, Vince?
No, I'm with you. Another one that you didn't mention, but you mentioned the guy is Xavier Watts. Like, what level is he going to be able to play at, and who is going to be his partner in crime? Like, what is that going to look like? Because everybody has safety as a question mark, but I do not have Xavier Watts as a question mark. But where is the ceiling? Like, how well can he or will he play? That's a big question mark. I have a lot of confidence, but that's still a big question mark, and he can't do it by himself. Somebody needs to step up and help him out.
Yeah. Very curious how that's going to go.
The history expert. Ooh, that is putting it out there. All right. Is it a Notre Dame
Knights Templar there? Is his avatar?
I know, like
interesting.
It's very. Yeah. Is it a Notre Dame tradition that the fastest guy in the team wears number 25? Rocket, Lindsey, Tyree, all could be considered the fastest player on the team at one point or another.
I think Munir Prince also got number 25 at one point in time as well, and he was considered really fast. I wouldn't call it a tradition as much as it's just kind of like, it's not a tradition. A tradition is like what, like, okay, your starting quarterback wears number 3, or it's just the way it is, or you have a number that goes to a certain player that represents something. This just tends to be something they do, and I think it's as much as a sort of a PR thing as it is anything that they've done. It's kind of, in some ways, it's kind of a tradition, but not really.
Yeah,
you know,
and it wasn't. There was a long time between Rocket and the other guys mentioned here. Like there was,
but we did see, like, after Rocket left, Randy Kinder wore 25, and he was considered really fast. You know, as I said, we saw like Munir Prince under Charlie Weiss wore number 25, and remember, he was the whoosh guy that Charlie talked about. Remember that?
That's right.
So,
yeah.
I mean, we've seen it, but I don't know that it's something that I would call a tradition per se. Yeah. And then a lot of those guys have changed. I mean, of the 2 guys you mentioned on the current team, they both changed their number.
Yeah.
Lindsey went to 0 and Tyree went to 2.
Right. They've changed away from that.
Yeah. They went away from that. So, all right. Leighton Burkholder asks, I know you posted an article about Devin Ford, but are you going to do a breakdown of him on the podcast, or are you going to talk about him in the running back season preview? We'll obviously talk about him in the season preview. I'm not going to do a podcast of him only, just because he's a quality depth player who has rushed for less than 100 yards the last 2 years. So I don't know if that's worthy of a entire podcast, but I think it's an important pickup, and we'll certainly have more to say about it when we do the running back preview. Certainly will. Yes, absolutely. Here's an interesting one, Vince.
We are not Marshall. To get to 10+ wins, what type of season does Sam Hartman need to have statistically?
I don't know if I mean, because he could have a great statistical season, Vince, and it not be an overly impressive season. I didn't think Ian Book was very good in 2019. I've said this a million times. I didn't think Ian. Well, no, not in 2019.
No, not in 19. Sorry.
Yeah, in 2019, which was his best statistical season, I didn't think he was very good. He threw for 3,034 yards. He threw for 34 touchdowns and 6 picks. But I didn't think he was very good. And he rushed for 4 times. He counted for 38 touchdowns, and he also rushed for 500 yards. I didn't think he was very good. I thought he padded his stats against bad teams.
Right.
You know, threw for 360 against New Mexico, threw for 336 against Virginia Tech. Vast majority of that came on that last drive. You know, threw for 5 touchdowns against Bowling Green, threw for 5 touchdowns against Navy. That was a decent team. Threw for 4 touchdowns against Stanford. They sucked. Threw for 4 touchdowns against Duke. They sucked. You know, it's a lot of stat padding in that season. And so I don't know that I would say he was overly impactful that year. I think of all his seasons, that was probably his least effective season, I would argue. He was better in 18, and I think he was at least more consistent and steady in 2020 than he was in 2019. To me, it's just about, look, they're going to beat the Marshalls with Sam Hartman at quarterback. They're going to beat the Stanfords. The question, Vince, to me is, can Sam Hartman play well enough to beat Ohio State, Clemson, and USC, and then avoid the trap game, against a Duke and not turn the ball over against NC State this year like he did last year? Those are the questions that I have.
Sure.
But it's not even about statistics. He could throw for 240 yards against NC State, but if it's really clutch, he's 20 of 29 and he's, 6 of 7 on third down, and they run the ball effectively and the defense makes stops. Sam Hartman, this is the whole point of what we talked about earlier. This season's success is not dependent on Sam Hartman throwing for X number of yards or X number of touchdowns. It's about be impactful in what you do. He could be impactful in the first half, Vince, and go 5 of 7 for 120 yards, but hit 2 bombs. And it's like Brandon Wimbush was impactful throwing the ball against USC in 2017. But do you remember what he ended up going for that game? Do you remember that stat line that Brandon had that game? He went 9 of 19 for 120 yards. But it was impactful. Why? Because he threw his 2 touchdown passes in the first quarter on back-to-back drives, and USC was geared towards stopping the run. He throws the ball over their head twice, once on a post route, once on a back shoulder go route for a touchdown, and USC was like, now what do we do? Because we tried to stop the run, and so then they had to balance out, and then all of a sudden the run game takes over. He was impactful in that game. Sam Hartman could have a start, something like that. Now he'll be better than 9 of 19 for 120 yards, right? But maybe it's he only throws for 250 yards. Well, 250 yards a game is not going to have you, with Heisman Trophy caliber statistics, right? I mean, it's just not. You're right around 3,000 yards and all that. It's, can you play well in the big games? I care more about that. I don't care about padding a bunch of stats and throwing for 500 yards against Central Michigan as much as I care about, did you throw for what you needed to do? Did you make the plays you needed to make against Ohio State? Having said that, I'm going to try to give respect to the question directly to answer the question and say that if Sam Hartman throws for at least 3,700 yards and at least accounts for at least 35 to 40 touchdowns, total touchdowns, Notre Dame, to me, is going to be a playoff team unless he does the stat padding. I mean, I would think there'd be a level of consistency there. To be a minimum 10-win team, I mean, if he throws for 3,200 yards and 28 touchdowns, Vince, that's a 10-win season to me. I don't think he needs to light the world on fire for them to be a 10-win team. To go beyond 10 wins, he's going to have to probably produce a little bit more. But because we've been in this dance before, Vince. We've seen years where the statistics at the end of the year looked good, but the play in big games was subpar. That's what I care more about.
Right.
That's what I care more about.
Yeah. To me, just to answer the question, when I first read the question in my head, I was thinking 3,500 and 35 total touchdowns. Like those are the numbers that came to my head for 10 wins. I think you're almost guaranteed to have that with those numbers. But the win total could be anywhere with those numbers. That's the thing. It's like, so many variables to that. So many variables. And it's not going to be, because I honestly don't think his stats are going to be out of this world this year. I just don't. But I also think that the team is going to be successful. I think he's going to score. He's going to put stats up when he needs to. When the game's on the line, I have a lot of faith in Sam Hartman. But I don't think he's going to be out of this world statistically. Like, I'm not predicting that he's going to break the single season record from Brady Quinn. You know what I mean? But I don't think he needs to, because he's going to have a really good running game as well.
If he does, Vince, this team's going to be hard to beat.
Exactly. Then that's the other piece of it, right? Like, if he does break all these records and if he does have the statistical season that some people think he's going to have, then the sky's the limit for this team.
Yeah.
I just don't want to let my mind go there.
Yeah.
I'll be that fan.
That's going to be a tough one.
Yeah.
That's going to be a tough one. Yeah. Man, oh boy. Yeah. I mean, let me not think about it. Let me not think about it.
You don't want to let
real quick one from the worst 2K Big Man HD. Is the Navy game on NBC? Yes. Navy game is on NBC and Peacock.
Yep.
Every other home game that they have is on NBC and Peacock, except for one. That's Central Michigan. That's the Peacock only game this year.
Right.
is the one on Central Michigan.
Yep.
So just to answer that one. Yeah.
Nathan Milton says, what is the single most valuable quality of Sam Hartman? I think it's his ability to go through reads. So that would be his. I mean, that's like a mental quality. I think, yes, I agree. I mean, that's a big one, obviously. And I think as a jaded Notre Dame fan, I would say it is his willingness to stretch the field, is what I'll say.
Yeah. I think it's that. I mean, I think Jack Cohn was brilliant at going through his reads.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. But at the end of the day, he just couldn't get the ball down the field enough to beat the better teams in the schedule. And he couldn't make enough plays with his legs. I think the most valuable quality he has relative to what is more about, I think, Vince, you answered it. It's not so much what his best trait is, but what is the trait that he brings that Notre Dame has lacked the most.
Right.
And you nailed it with the belly throw to ball. It's a very – I agree with you on that, Vince. I agree with you.
Ray Holcraft, how many reps does the second-team quarterback get during the week, and what does a typical preparation look like for the backup quarterback? What work is expected from them during the summer? That's a good question.
Everybody always says it's 60-40. It ends up being closer to like 65, 70, 30, especially like in the bigger game, the weeks of the bigger games. But, 60-40, 70-30, some range in there as far as the number of reps they'll get in 7-on-7. Because you'll script it all. Hey, we're going to be in team for 15 minutes. These are the plays we want to get through. Sam, you get the first 10. So-and-so, you get the next 5, something like that. You break it up like that. You'll get more in the summer and fall camp. As you get closer and closer to the season, the starter takes more and more of the reps, is pretty much how it works. What is expected during the summer? Continue getting your body in the best shape it can be, but get in the film room, watch a ton of film, and get out there and throw a million balls. Not literally, it's a figurative statement, but throw a ton of balls, get really on the same page with the receivers, and learn as much as you can from Sam Hartman. That's going to be the expectation of the young receivers to me, or the young quarterbacks to me. That's going to be the expectation I have for them.
And every team does it different as far as how they break it up. And how they deal with summer and all of that. But summer is where they're going to get their most reps and their most work. And that's where they've got to grow the most, no doubt.
Yep. Agree. Very much agree. All right, let's get to this one here real quick.
Jay Henry, which offensive freshman, not just Notre Dame, has the best chance of making an All-America team? Wow, that is a broad question.
Not just Notre Dame. Which offensive freshman, not just Notre Dame? I think Cardinal Tate's going to have a chance to be maybe a freshman All-American at Ohio State. I don't know if he's going to quite get enough touches, but I think he's going to play a lot. Jay, that's a good one. I'm going to have to think about that. Let me write that down because that would be a really good CFB Nation show. Freshman All-American. That's a really good CFB Nation show. By the way, Vince, I thought of a lot of the topics for some of the CFB Nation stuff we're going to do this summer.
Nice.
It'll be fun. Be fun for us to. And I ordered 2 Lindy's. They should be delivered today or tomorrow. So when it comes up, you come by and pick it up.
Beautiful.
So that way we'll have some of your prep stuff for that. So Vince always likes it when I buy the magazine because it's a business expense. All right.
I got last year's right here, like literally right here.
That's right. There you go. Yeah, Jay, I'd have to think about that one. I mean, I think Dante Moore is going to be the quarterback that plays the most and has the most production. I don't think they're going to go very long with Dante not being the starting quarterback there. I really don't. I really don't. Hey, don't sleep on. Look, I wasn't super high on Justice Haynes. I didn't watch his senior film a ton. I'm going to watch that soon because I'm working on finishing up my top 100 list for that class. And he looked really good in the spring game, and I heard he had a really good spring for Alabama. He could be a guy that could be there. As far as Notre Dame guys, I mean, look, don't kid yourself. Jaden Greathouse could end up being that guy. I mean, he certainly could. I think Rico Flores could be that guy. I mean, one of the 2 freshman receivers. Jeremiah Love could be that guy. Look, they're an injury away at running back from Jeremiah Love getting a ton of touches, and I think he would do some fun things with it. I think would it shock you if Jeremiah Love had a freshman season comparable to Josh Adams if there's some injuries at running back? Heck no.
If he gets it, and that's going to be the thing. It's going to be, can he get the touches, the opportunity? Right. Exactly.
Right. And then Jagasol would be one. I'm not predicting it, but I could see him playing a bunch as a freshman, especially if there's an injury.
Yeah.
I could see him playing a bunch as like Joe Walt was a freshman All-American, but that's only because Blake Fisher got hurt. Otherwise, Blake Fisher would have been the freshman All-American that year.
True. Yeah.
So there's also that, Jay, that factors into it as well. But Jay, that's a good question. I wrote that down. I'm going to put some thought into that because I think that'll be a good one. Vince, do you got time for one more?
Of course. Yeah.
Because there's one about Michigan. I'm not sure if you've heard this or not. I've had a lot of people ask me about this, and I don't know where this is coming from. But here's one from Eric Santini.
He says, what's y'all's opinion on Michigan having over 100 kids on the roster and projected to sign a class of over 30 with transfers not being on scholarship and all have boosters pay for their school?
Yeah, I've heard this before. I don't think that's a real thing. I've heard that people have said that's a thing on like some of the 247 boards. I don't know if it's like the Michigan board, the Notre Dame board, the national board. I have no clue. I don't go over there, but that can't be I mean, like if that's true, then it's going to be very similar to where Notre Dame is with over 100 kids on their roster too, because they have walk-ons.
Sure, exactly.
There's no way that's legal. And here's the thing. Here's why I have a hard time buying it. They just lost a basketball kid player, their best basketball player, Hunter Dickinson, because he was whining about not getting much NIL money. And they had a guy that was transferring in from North Carolina that ended up going back on his commitment as a transfer, Caleb Love. And I won't be shocked if we come to find out NIL played a role in that. So you're telling me they're not, and there's been some complaints that they're not giving enough to players and on it. You're going to tell me that they're not dominating in NIL, but yet all these boosters are paying for like 20 kids to be in school there? That doesn't, like, why would you be paying for your number 85 to 100 players to be on scholarship? Or if they're going to sign a class over 30, it wouldn't shock me because they're going to lose guys. They have a lot of guys slated to graduate. I just don't know if I buy that.
Yeah.
I'd have to hear more about that, Vince. I don't know if I buy that.
And that's
so I don't.
Oh, yeah.
I don't have a lot to say about that one because I just don't know if I buy that. I'd have to hear more specifically about that we're talking about here, and yeah, I'd have to hear more about that. I'm just not sure I buy that, to be honest with you.
And that feels like if they're just so open about it, like that it's totally illegal.
Like everybody knows about it. Like,
yeah, I have a hard time with that. And as much as I don't like Michigan, I do feel like they do a lot of things above board.
Yeah.
Now that's just
there's been some things that have happened there recently that kind of make you think like they're under the watchful eye of the NCAA.
Right. I mean, to be flat out paying for tuition for out of state kids is nuts. It's like $60,000 a year. I don't know, just tuition alone. So that would be a hard pill for me to swallow. So I don't know that would be accurate.
Yeah, I have a tough time with that one, Vince. Let's go to this. We have a couple we're going to wrap up here. So we can get Vince to finish up here because he's got to get rolling here. Here's one from Roger Dodger.
There we go. Our resident USC fan. Is Sam Hartman better than the new starting quarterback at Ohio State?
Yes.
In 2023, yes.
He may not be statistically better because of the nature of their offense, but he's a better quarterback than Kyle McCord. And yes, he's a better quarterback than Kyle McCord this season and probably for his career. Yeah.
And that's fair.
There's only one team
that far. I was to say,
there's only one team on Notre Dame's schedule this year who has a quarterback as good as Sam Hartman. That's it, or better. And that's USC. That's it.
And that's you.
Brendan Armstrong's not better than Sam Hartman, in my opinion. Riley Leonard's not better than Sam Hartman, although he's pretty good. Phil Dracovic, after all his injuries, is not better than Sam Hartman. Jack Plummer's definitely not better than Sam Hartman. Kyle McCord's not better than Sam Hartman.
Is there a record for how many times a quarterback can lose to Notre Dame from a different team, like the same kid?
Yeah, this has got to be a record. If they lose this year, he'll have three. You're talking about Jack Plummer. He'll have 3 straight losses to if they beat Louisville. I mean, it's no gimme.
Right,
if they beat Louisville, that'll be 3 straight losses to Notre Dame on 3 different teams because he was at Purdue in 2021, Cal last year, and if they lose to Louisville this year, you're like, dude, you're going to transfer to Navy next year so you can get your 4th loss to Notre Dame? Like, what the heck is going on? All right, here's another one, Vince. That's funny. That's freaking
all hilarious. Right. From ND Cheat Sheet, have you guys heard anything about the new stadium DJ for home games? There were negative reviews with the stadium DJ last year, and I was wondering if the new guy is an upgrade or if it even matters. Didn't know they had one. number one.
I didn't either. I think it just
same
means
music
whoever's
they've
playing
always
the
been
music.
playing. I mean, it feels like it's the same music they were always playing to me. Now, we're in the press box, which is pretty soundproof. And so a lot of the music is not like, it's more like background noise. I'm not like listening for the music. And I know it's a lot louder when you're out in the stands. So I don't think it matters in any way, shape, or form, to be honest with you.
It matters to fans. I mean, fans
Correct.
complain about all types of things. I don't think it has any impact on the game. So, I honestly, the thought never crossed my mind to ask or care about whether or not Notre Dame hired a new DJ. I don't, and not even to like be like prudish about it. Like we don't hear it. The press box pretty soundproof. I mean, we can kind of hear it, but
sometimes they open up those little windows at the top. But
yeah, and I have the noise canceling headphones on too, Vince, so I don't hear it that way either. So it's just not something that's on my radar.
Right.
So if I was sitting in the stands, maybe I might care a little bit more about it. But, two last ones. Number one, Jason Smith, is Micah Bell faster than Chris Tyree, the 40 and the 100? Micah Bell is faster than Chris Tyree in the 100 or the 100. He is not, in my opinion, probably faster than Chris Tyree in shorter distances. So, but they're very, very comparable. Very, very comparable speed-wise. They're both extremely fast. If I had to give the edge, I'd probably, I mean, based on track times, you got to give it to Micah Bell. He's got better track times than Chris Tyree had in 100 and 200 and long jump and all that kind of stuff. And here's the last one, Vince, from Roger Dodger.
The SEC is trying to decide between 8 or 9 conference games a season. If they stay at 8, all other conferences should change to 8 immediately.
100% agree on that. 100. If the SEC is going to expand and still stay at 8 games, every other conference should do the exact same thing. You're going to make more money that way because your extra game is going to be almost, for more of your teams in your conference, it's going to be a home game. Whereas if it's a conference game, it's 50-50, right? 50-50, half the teams obviously are on the road, half teams are at home. More teams are going to add an extra home game so you can make more money off the gate and all that other stuff, ticket sales, concessions, parking, all that stuff. So yeah, absolutely, they should. I want to see more conferences kind of pretty much calling the SEC's bluff. Okay, you're going to only play 8 games. We're going to play 8 games. So you know what that means? It means we can play you more. So why don't you come up here and play us?
Right.
You know what I mean? We'll schedule home and home. Sure. Hey, Alabama, this is Gene Smith. You guys want to schedule in home and home? No, why not? You know what I mean? Like, I would do much more of that. Now, LSU would do it, or at least they did before. I don't know if they'll do it under Kelly. I don't know if they'll adopt more of what Kelly had last year. But Georgia's been a team that's been notorious for being willing to travel and play people. They played Boise when nobody else would play Boise on the eastern part of the country because they saw what happened to Oregon and Washington, teams like that, to Boise back then. They played Virginia Tech. They've done that. Auburn's been a team that has a history of – Auburn went and played Penn State at Penn State last year. But most teams don't. And so I would call their bluff and I would go to 8 games.
Yeah.
And why not? Why not? I absolutely do that. Vince, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that would be great. And because I think it does promote more big ticket games, more highly watched games. Those are the ones I personally like. I mean, yes, you're going to get some of those teams that are going to play an extra game against the Citadel or something like that. Yep, that's going to happen. I hope that doesn't happen. I hope that there's a little bit of peer pressure so that does not happen, like you said, because I think that those games are terrible. Like, what is it, the second or third to last game of the regular season? The SEC always plays like those garbage teams. Like, it's a wasted week,
right?
In my opinion.
FCS week. Yeah, agree with you.
Horrible. That's a horrible week of football for everybody else in the country because the SEC has done that. Like, branch out a little bit.
And I'm so sick of the whole, the SEC. So, yeah, but you don't play as many games in your league as everybody else does. So stop complaining.
Right.
Stop complaining.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's just nonsense. But ESPN lets them get away with it, and they don't call them out on it. So they're going to keep doing it.
Of course not.
So, Vince, that's going to do it, man. Why don't you take us out of here?
All right, man. Thanks, everybody, for joining us on this edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. Make sure you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, and share our podcast with your friends and family. That's the best part about this job is everybody tell me, people tell me that they listen, they recognize us or whatever. That's fun. I really do enjoy that, as odd as it is sometimes and tough to get used to. I love it. So make sure you guys share with your family and friends because we're here for you, and that's what we do. So stay tuned. We've got Irish IB Nation Sports Talk tonight at 6 o'clock. It's going to be me.
It's going
and
to be
Sean
you, right?
Stiers.
You and Sean.
Yep.
Yep, there you go.
It's going to be me and Sean Stiers tonight at 6. I'm going to take a little bit of a respite and come right back at it for 6 o'clock. And then tomorrow, are you starting your show tomorrow, or is it something different?
It'll be me. Yeah, just me doing the midweek rundown. So it's going to be midweek rundown, but it's just going to be more of a solo show.
Gotcha.
And it's going to be a little different. Like mailbag's going to be different. Like we won't do a mailbag. It'll just be more, if you have super chats, but it's just solo show. There won't be mailbags afterwards. Thursday, I don't know if the Thursday show is going to start this week or next.
Okay.
But Thursday is going to be a show that Sean Stiers and I are going to start doing together on Thursdays. I'm going to start trying to get more guests this summer. So we're ramping that stuff up. And we kind of did it last week. We had Bill Bender on Tuesday last week. We had Tim O'Malley. So part of it is because Ryan's, out. But when Ryan's done with paternity leave, he's still not going to be back on 5 days a week. We're going to have him focusing on being on certain shows, but also someone who will be doing a lot of his recruiting stuff as well. And it was just hard for him to do that when he's doing 5 shows a week. So we're just really trying to keep it fresh, mix things up. And then, of course, Vince and I will be doing a lot of shows together this summer.
Yeah, man.
The OGs
Summertime.
will be back.
Summertime, baby. So make sure you guys stay tuned. And for Brian, I'm Vince, and we will talk to you next time on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.